701. Hey, good morning, everyone. It's another Cirucci team brief, October 4th, 2019. You got Johnny and George with me. It should be another great one. We were discussing some things we were going to go into on the show today just before we went live just now. And we'll kick off with what we were just talking about. We were going into vacated Supreme Court decisions and presidential pardons, and the intrigue that they exert. Most of the times, the president's pardon, arch criminals that are connected to the Jesuits. One example, just we go into the recent one we were talking about, Jesuit trained G. Gordon Liddy, after he broke into the Watergate buildings and stole the documents from the Ellsberg's office that he was sent on command for. He was part of the plumbers unit. G. Gordon Liddy, trained at Fordham, he was given a pardon by Jimmy Carter after that whole thing. And he was exempt from testifying to the Watergate committee. I think that's the power of the Jesuits. But recently, Conrad Black, a papal knight of St. Gregory the Great, intimately connected with Jeffrey Epstein, like very intimately connected. He had over 30 entries on Epstein's Black Book contact list. Conrad Black was meeting Epstein. Conrad Black was neighbors with Donald Trump in Palm Beach also, and Trump was neighbors with Epstein in Palm Beach, so they all lived in the same neighborhood. Conrad Black, he was facing criminal charges in the United States for several racketeering claims with his company Hollinger International. He would take the profits from the company and launder it into his own personal accounts. He was given recently. This was 2019, just in May this year. He was given full pardon by Jesuit trained Donald Trump, who was also very connected with Jeffrey Epstein. And the Catholic Supreme Court actually changed the definition of bribery to get Conrad Black off of corruption and bribery charges and fraud charges. So you can see the level of protection that the papal knights receive by the current legal system.
Yeah, we were also talking about John J. Gagin, the pedophile monster who was kicked to the curb. And even though he was kicked to the curb, and as a matter of fact, kicked to death, as well as being kicked to the curb in his prison cell. In 1998, I have to say, there may have been one or two others, but off the top of my head, he is the only prominent pedophile priest. And very, very rarely do you get anything more than a priest who is a convicted pedophile. Not to get sidetracked, but
well, it's a great point, Johnny, because you saw the law was untouched in that whole scandal.
Absolutely, yeah. So he was the impetus for the Spotlight investigation there in Boston, and after he had committed decades of raping children, he was the only priest that I know of that was defrocked. I'm sure there were maybe 2 or 3 or 4 others. In a pool of thousands upon thousands. Well, let's not exaggerate. I would say thousands, without exaggeration, thousands of child raping clergy and tens of thousands of victims, perhaps more. He's the only one that I know of off the top of my head who was defrocked. And even after all of that, he was convicted, sent to jail, and murdered in jail. They put him in a jail cell for whatever reason. There's obviously something more about the Gagin case, because
I'm wondering if they didn't want him to talk at all, so they said, we'll put him in jail with this. Obviously, this Gagin was a 75-year-old, frail old man going against a big guy who's in there for violent crimes. Obviously,
no. What had happened was, the guy who was in his cell beat to death. He was hitchhiking, and the guy who picked him up tried to make a homosexual advance upon him, and the hitchhiker beat him to death. And that's the guy whose cell that they put Gagin in. Really? Are you kidding me? That's about as transparent as Epstein's multiple suicide attempts while he was on suicide watch. George, you trying to jump in? Oh, by the way, real quick, George.
Yes. So
vacated Gagin's conviction after he was dead, which just really
okay.
upset the pedophile victims, the kids who were raped by this monstrous piece of shit.
Okay, if you go back to the 1940s, about 70 years ago, during the Nuremberg trials, I forgot the exact numbers, something like 100, 200 people, men were tried for various crimes. 11 were sentenced to, a dozen or so were hanged, including, well, actually, Hermann Goering was supposed to be hanged, but he allegedly committed suicide beforehand. So, out of thousands and thousands of men who ran Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s, only a handful were ever actually tried. Most of them got light sentences, maybe 5 or 10 years, and most of those ended up getting reduced down the road. So, a few, for the most part, a few low-level players who most people had never heard of got punished. But so it's a similar situation with the Catholic Church, with the in recent decades. But speaking of World War II and speaking of war crimes, something that came up was Yugoslavia, or what used to be Yugoslavia, and the Ustashi. You had two of the major architects of the Ustashi massacre were Aloysius Stefanik and Ante Pavlovic. Stefanik was the prelate, the Archbishop of, I believe, Zagreb. He was actually tried by the Yugoslavian courts and was initially sentenced to 16 years, of which he only had to serve about a third, 5 years, and most of that was home confinement. So he died, Stefanik died in 1960, and almost immediately his cause for canonization, i.e. being declared a saint, was raised. Because his apologists said, oh, no, Stefanik was railroaded. He was completely misunderstood. He just got a kangaroo trial. He got a show to court, and he's wrongfully convicted. He was actually, Stefanik was actually a good guy because he was fighting against those wicked communists. So,
hey George, what didn't he hold a governmental office as well?
He could have. I'd had to defer to Eric on that because he's more familiar with these Ustashis.
He was the chaplain of the. He was the official head chaplain of the Ustashi army. And there was a series of vice chaplains. Another vice chaplain in the Ustashi regime was a Jesuit, Dragutin Camber S.J., for instance, who was also a chief of police as a Jesuit in the city of.
Can you guys give examples? Can you guys give examples of some of the things the Ustashi would do?
Well, I mean, I'd rather not.
No, I'd rather you would.
Because
listen to me. Why? Why is that important, George?
Well, because it's like, the audience should be forewarned. I mean, among other things, they'd have contests to see how many babies, how many Eastern Orthodox babies they could cut, throats they could cut in an hour, among other things. They did things that would make the German Nazis cringe.
Oh, and that's actually what happened. This is a fact of history. The Italian fascists and the Nazis were actually attempting to rescue the Orthodox Serbs at the end of the Ustashi bloodbaths, because even the Nazis were so outraged at what was taking place, and that should say something, because the Nazis had their own death camps, set up all throughout Europe, and the fascist Italians, weren't, great moralists either.
So one of the chief
point though, the name of this priest was a Franciscan named Peter Brejda. They actually had a contest one night in Jasenovac to see how many throats they could slash with a butcher's knife, and this one guy managed to cut 2,000 throats in one night. And actually, I have the testimony of one of these Franciscan priests on my channel in a documentary that was done in Croatian, but there's English subtitles. And one of the Franciscan priests, testifies about the night of the massacre. He says I was in a bliss in the seventh heaven. Messed up stuff like that. People got to realize that they would burn people alive and push them into pits to their death, and have them just buried. Ante Pavlovic, for instance, he would collect eyes. He would have his loyal Ustashis gouge the eyes out of all of his victims, and Pavlovic had a huge collection plate in his house Like there was a famous Italian writer that Edmund Paris quotes in his book Satellite. And I'll link that book in the description now that we're talking about it. I'd say it's one of the more authoritative books on Ustashi. Edmund Paris, Genocide in Satellite Croatia. Ante Pavlich, and Pavlich was a devout Catholic brought up by the Jesuits. He was the temporal arm of the Ustashi. Stepniak was the spiritual arm. But Pavlich would actually have a collection of eyes that were gouged out from
while they were still alive, I'm sure. Aloysius Stepniak was a bishop at the time of World War II. And he was, I guess, Eric says he was the chaplain of the Ustashi. He was basically cheering them on. He was an absolute monster, and the Catholic Church rewarded him repeatedly. In 1952, Pacelli made him a cardinal. And just as who was given us? I mixed up who was given the background on him. Just like you said, he was given 16 years imprisonment, and most of those were house arrest. And in 2016, his conviction was overturned. He is now a Catholic saint.
Yeah, that was the Jesuit Francis. That was Francis that pushed that through, because he was only beatified. It was 1998 where John Paul II beatified him, which created outrage also, but it was the Jesuit Francis who pushed for the canonization.
Eric, I would share, because I have such crappy internet, if you can, grab one of the many pictures of an Orthodox prelate or primate embracing a pope. And there's several of this going on with Francis now. But the sainthood process, many, many steps where you are confirming again and again and again, this person was really special to the Catholic Church. First, you have to say there is cause that the person become a saint. Then you verify that they become venerated. Then you beatify them. Then finally they become a saint. And part of that process is you have to prove that there were at least one or two miracles as well. Absolutely sickening how they.
I wonder how they would push what the miracle Stepniak did.
The miracle
Edmund Paris. I linked the book. Edmund Paris quotes out of Stepniak's diaries. He was saying "Thank God for Adolf Hitler," stuff like that.
The miracle is the gaslighting that you would have such an absolute monster who is a saint of the Catholic Church, and I wish we could beam this into every Orthodox household to let them know just how vehemently they are hated by the Catholic Church and how much their own clergy has betrayed them. And Eric did a great job. You have pages of pictures of these corrupt clowns kissing the ring of the Catholic Church and of the Pope who's sitting there, and Francis himself who got this.
Here's what here's the head of the Orthodox Church when Benedict was Pope. This Benedict was literally a Hitler Youth.
Right. Great point. Hitler Youth. Yeah.
And this is the book I linked in the chat. Everyone, this is a great book. You can split this into single page on Sejda.com if you prefer reading it single page. But this is a very authoritative book on the massacres that took place in Croatia. But the publisher here, the American Institute for Balkan Affairs, went bankrupt after this book was published, coincidentally. But I got this from Interlibrary Loan, and there's probably 300 pages. It's a tough read. You gotta prepare for the because Edmund Paris is very vivid with everything that took place, and it's not easy reading. But I recommend everyone know this history
and read it. And as soon as you do, go back to how Aloysius Stepniak was made a saint of the Catholic Church, led by Francis.
Oh, it's absolutely disgusting. And just to tie in the Knights of Columbus. This was a lot earlier, guys, but I think this was already in the 60s. There's Archbishop Stepniak school in New York City, I believe. Archbishop Stepniak. You see Archbishop Stepniak High School. This is
it. That's something you want to hang on your walls. Is your high school diploma from Archbishop Stepniak High School. So George Stepniak was another example of a conviction that was vacated. I don't know if that's what you wanted to continue on about.
Well, if I can,
George Test.
if I can just mention one other detail about Stepniak. Even though technically speaking, he was not a Jesuit.
Guys, do you see this on the screen? Wow. Oh, sorry, guys. Just you see my screen here. Apparently, Francis Spellman was like instrumental in opening the school. I just wanted to get that point across. How fitting.
Perfect.
On the screen here.
Nellie, the cross-dressing pedophile, Spellman.
Same Nellie. This guy gave William Donovan his Night of St. Sylvester also. Same Spellman. Sorry, keep going there, George.
George, keep going.
Was he you there, George? Yeah, it looks like his audio is still good.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, he'll be back. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. Yeah, because you can see like the Knights of Columbus were the group that like were advocating for the funding of this school. This is like right in New York City. You can see on the map. Looks like it's in Westchester County. Thing with that, like, this mass murderer now has like a Catholic school named after him. Like that's just gross. I think it is.
All right, so I'm going to go through some my list. Doc says hello to everybody. And when we're talking about Epstein, some great points on Epstein. If you haven't been to Eric's channel recently, you got to go there. He is doing a fantastic job of connecting the dots between pedophile provider Jeffrey Epstein and the Catholic Church. And Doc points out that there were others who weren't disappeared. Lawrence King was sent to prison from the Omaha scandal that we all mislabel the Franklin cover-up because devout Roman Catholic and former seminarian John DeCamp is the one that was commissioned to distract everyone from the fact that the Boys Town orphanage was the epicenter of that scandal and the rape and abuse of the little boys there being given to politicians and so forth. And instead we focus on the middleman, Lawrence King, and his Franklin Federal Credit Union that had absolutely nothing to do with that scandal. It was the Boys Town cover-up, not the Franklin cover-up. Lawrence King was sent to prison for embezzling Boys Town money. He was never convicted of trafficking little boys. And instead, they took one of the whistleblowers, Alicia Owen, and buried her in prison for 25 years to let everybody know, all the victims, let those little kids know, don't you dare think that you can step up. And I swear, I'd like to get every FBI, because the FBI was on the scene, part of that outrage. Every FBI agent, every judge, every lawyer, every prosecutor was part of that, and string them up. And I can't even tell you the things I want to do to them in that outrage.
Oh, another outrage, Johnny, was that the private investigator Gary Caradori was at the time was one of the only like honest journalists like doing investigating into this case. But he had like a plane crash over near Chicago, like where the police chief Robert Wadman like moved over to his new district. The Wadman chief was instantly involved in the Franklin scandal, but it was a Catholic medical facility, like helicopter, that came to scoop up Garadori's remains. And then
great point. Wadman was chased out of Omaha because he was a child rapist pig too, and he was sent to. Oh my goodness! It is Aurora, which is a suburb of Chicago. He was a police chief. He picked right back up again, continued to get a nice fat paycheck as another police chief. And surprise, surprise, when Gary Caradori and his little boy were murdered in their small plane, the wreckage fell in the hands of Wadman, the corrupt child raping piece of shit. One of the people that Alicia Owen named. as well as the editor and publisher of the Omaha World Herald. I want to say his name was Johnson. I got to look him up too. Alicia Owen named several of these people. And just amazing coincidence that Gary Caradoy's body with his little boy should fall into the hands of Robert Wadman. And then they all get picked up by a Catholic hospital. So yeah, Doc mentions that insiders that didn't get suicided, Lawrence King and James Elephantis, he mentions also, which is probably a phony name anyway. So,
well, it shows you how profoundly controlled, all these cases are. The great information in the Epstein case, is similar to the Franklin case in the sense that, like, the mainstream media from as soon as the Epstein revelations dropped, it's been covering up the Vatican connections to Epstein. It's like how the Franklin cover up, like the supposed, like the Boys Town cover up, renamed Franklin cover up, is covering up the Vatican connections there. One name, I think I'm going to screen share here so you can see a photo of this guy. I sent George another invite to the chat. Hopefully he can get back in and join us. But this is another angle of the Epstein case here. Is this guy here, John Scarola. This guy was the attorney for some of the Epstein victims. And, this guy coincidentally has 2 degrees from Jesuit Georgetown University. You can see that right on the screen here. John Jack Scarola graduated with honors from Georgetown University in 1969 and from Georgetown Law Center in 1973. And, this guy was on the Miami Herald documentary saying, oh, we're not going to allow justice to be broken in this case. We're not going to allow it to be bought. Like, we're going to get justice for the victims, blah, 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 blah. Just pure mockery at its finest. This guy was working with Acosta to get Epstein, like, that plea deal. There's an interesting, some quotes here. Just if you type in Jack Scarola, he's been making some comments after Epstein died. His Jesuit-trained lawyer for his victims. And think about the full, like, you have control on absolutely both sides. Alexander Acosta himself, was Catholic. The lead FBI investigator when Epstein was brought back in, William F. Sweeney Jr. is a devout Catholic, went to Villanova, who goes to mass with Dolan. The new head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, who's the devout Catholic Attorney General William Barr, said is going to come in to do the shakeup to find out what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. Kathleen Hawk Sawyer went to Welling Jesuit College.
Hey, I have to point something out to you, bro. We have a celebrity in the chat, Jorg Joggler66. He's got plenty of good stuff on his own channel too. In fact, I'd invite him in if I had his email. I'd invite him to join us.
Yeah, Jogler does great work. Yeah, he should. He makes posts also into my my Reddit Jesuit World Order subreddit page from time to time. I'd love to have him on if he does give an email. I would send him an invite. This here's the here. Oh, I see George is back in. Welcome back, George. You had some connection issues there.
Okay, could I? Hello, fellas, can you hear me? Johnny, Eric?
Yeah, I got you. Go.
I got you. You hear us?
Okay.
Go.
Sorry about that. So just some technical issues. I was having some technical issues, so I just want to say hello, York. Moin moin. Guten Morgen, Guten Tag, Guten Abend, whatever the time it is, whatever time it is over there in Europe. Anyhow, I just wanted to throw in a couple other things about Stefanik. I know we haven't talked about him in a few minutes, but as I said, I was having some technical issues. Now, technically speaking, Stefanik was not a Jesuit. However, he did get a law degree from St. Gregory's Pontifical Academy in Rome. So he had a nexus to the Jesuits. Now, if I could just make a little collateral point.
Hey, George, let me clarify. George, let me clarify. I never made the connection that the Pontifical Gregorian Academy, that is Loyola's first university. That's the first one that he created there in Rome, correct?
Yeah, so that's basically the Georgetown of Europe, if you will.
Right. Keep going, George.
So anyhow, oftentimes, even though priests or prelates may not actually be Jesuits, they'll oftentimes have some sort of nexus with the Jesuits through schooling. As I said, Stefanik went to got his law degree from the Greg, as they call it informally. Anyhow, also the Archbishop of San Antonio, Texas, what's his name? Jose Garcia Silar, I believe. He actually got his master's degree from the Greg, St. Gregory Pontifical Academy, and he got his master's degree in psychology. The current so-called Bishop of Santa Rosa, California, Robert Vassa, got his law degree from St. Gregory's Pontifical Academy. And you have all the examples are almost endless. So as I said, technically speaking, they're not Jesuits, but they have some sort of affiliation with them. Usually through schooling.
That's where Samuel Bakioki studied, the Adventist. He studied at the Jesuit Gregorian University in Rome, and the Gregorian University published his big book, Samuel Bakioki, the Adventist, I think from Saturday to Sunday. Like it's even in like the cover page of that book, like on this Adventist book, it says published by the Gregorian Press, which is the press of the Jesuit school in Rome. Which in other words, like the Jesuits are publishing this Adventist book.
Yeah, the Adventists are thoroughly infiltrated. They're thoroughly infiltrated. No one in the Adventist hierarchy. When you see great videos from our good friend Walter Veit, you have to remember that Walter is a black sheep. He is not welcome in the typical Adventist. He's certainly not welcome to big Adventist events.
Well, I'd say I think Bill Hughes has even talked about that too. Bill Hughes has been shunned by the.
He's a black sheep too. Yeah, you bet.
Adventist.
Okay, and why I hate saying this, but speaking of Ben Carson, he's like the token black in the Trump administration. Don't mean to say that. He's a brilliant surgeon, but Ben Carson is a Seventh-day Adventist. So that's he gives an example as to how almost all SDA are thoroughly controlled.
Yeah, Jorg is talking about how these populations are not part of the history, and Armenians and Slavs who've been slaughtered, genocide. And I also want to mention the Rhine Meadow death camp that Eisenhower did to the German soldiers at the end of World War II to continue to punish them as the Cold War. The Cold War was all a process of punishing Luther's homeland, as was World War II. The Rhine Meadow death camp is just absolutely sickening, shocking, starving thousands upon thousands of German soldiers, not hardcore Nazi SS stormtroopers, just rank and file German soldiers, starved to death, sickened to death.
It's kind of Eisenhower is viewed as a hero to some because he made his the military-industrial complex speech at the. I think that was
right.
That is like last. It was one of his last speeches.
Eisenhower's another Reagan. Eisenhower's another phony right-wing conservative who did absolutely nothing other than to get us into more trouble in the Cold War. As a matter of fact, the Controlled Opposition John Birch Society, there was a big reason for them coming into being, was how infiltrated Eisenhower and his administration were by communists. He was an absolute fraud, just like Reagan. If you take the Cold War out of the equation, Eisenhower, Reagan, they're about as right-wing as Nancy Pelosi and Jimmy Carter.
Well, by the way, if I could mention something off topic, Johnny, you were talking a couple weeks ago about Normandy, about the raid, the assault on Paul de Hoek. there at Normandy, and
the Ranger assault there on I think there were 88 millimeter cannon flat guns that were there at Point de Hoc, and they were supposed to take those cannons out so that there wouldn't be a slaughter, and they scaled sheer cliffs only to find out that the cannons had been moved. Surprise, surprise.
Well, actually, they were never actually even installed.
Right. Yes, they were never there. Good for you.
So anyhow, they had to scale this 100-foot, 30-meter escarpment, and the casualty rates were insane. It was like 50%. There were like 200 some odd men and 250 men, and something like half of them were killed or wounded. Well, it turns out the officer who was in charge, I have not said to you anything on this because I found this out yesterday, was James O. Rudder. And he died in 1970. And turns out he was a 32nd degree Freemason. As I mentioned before on a previous broadcast, the overall architect of the Normandy invasion was a fellow by the name of Alfred Wedemeyer. He was basically, he was on the planning committee for it. Wedemeyer went to Creighton Prep. Alfred Wedemeyer lived from 1897 to 1989. And he was on the planning committee, as I said, for Normandy. He also was involved with several other activities. He was an advisor not only to Eisenhower, but to George C. Marshall, Chiang Kai-shek. He was also the architect.
Right, pause, George. Let's give the big picture. Pause. Let's give the big picture. The reason why you and I are talking about this is that we are giving credence to incognito Jesuit Eric John Phelps, who says things like Normandy, the purpose of the Normandy invasion was to slaughter as many American Protestants and German Protestants as possible in a massive, completely unnecessary meat grinder. There were several other ways to free Catholic France, or really maybe just never, because I don't know how important that was to free Catholic France. You could still drive up through Italy, which we had made inroads on. But here you had an entire, you never go into the teeth of a well-defended beachhead across a body of water where you are extremely vulnerable and the enemy is sitting there waiting, not to mention the fact that the enemy is Erwin fucking Rommel, pardon my language. So the point of all this is just how unnecessary the Normandy invasion was. So this is the implied thing in the background of what you're talking about that we haven't mentioned openly, is what a traitor and what a puppet and what a fraud Eisenhower was. Eisenhower never had a single command in his life. Not a platoon, not a company, not a battalion, not a brigade, not a division. I don't even know, as a former Marine and former soldier, I don't even know how you managed to go through your entire career and never command a single unit.
Well, I would say it was Jesuit-trained Robert D. Murphy at Marquette, who is Eisenhower's key foreign policy advisor. So Eisenhower's probably just taking instructions from the late Jesuit Robert Murphy. Eisenhower was a football coach no one knows this about him. He was a football coach at a Catholic college before
St. Mary's in Texas, something like that.
Are you kidding me? And I found this interesting. I linked this in the chat, or I linked this Reddit post I put together. But Eisenhower had a literal Jesuit handler in the White House while he was president. His name was Bernard Michael Shanley. From Wikipedia, Shanley was best known for his work with U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower. He served under President Eisenhower as Deputy House Chief of Staff, Appointment Secretary, and Special Counsel. This Bernard Shanley, who is Eisenhower's man in the White House, was educated by Jesuits at Fordham. He was a Knight of Malta, Shanley, and went to Notre Dame University and Catholic St. Benedict's Prep School in Newark. And this was what Eisenhower's basically his key secretary in the White House. This was Eisenhower. This was his Joseph Patrick Tumulty for Woodrow Wilson. Tumulty was Wilson's Jesuit-educated White House.
He was an empty, non-Catholic front for their outrageous machinations and agenda. George, did I throw you off track, or you want to keep going? Well,
it was almost impossible to throw me off track because I throw myself off track. But anyhow, just speaking about Eisenhower. And of course, you were talking about the attack on Pointe du Hoc, or however you say it, how it was unnecessary because the guns were never installed. And people will often use the excuse, well, we had bad intelligence. Well, the Allies, the Royal Air Force and the U.S. Army Air Corps took thousands of photographs of Normandy in the weeks prior to the invasion. The French underground had spies in the area. Are you saying nobody took a picture of Pointe du Hoc? The French spies couldn't have told them anything. So no, this was done on purpose. And how many times have they used that for other things like Pearl Harbor, 9/11? Fill in the blank.
Yeah, that's another great point, George. Intelligence. Where was the intelligence? How many times, George, have we come across a papist in intelligence? And I will tell you from the military point of view, intelligence is the organization that tells you who the enemy is. You trust those clowns to have the inside information on who the enemy is, where the enemy is, what the enemy is doing. And that's why they're key to the treason.
Well, absolutely. Thinking about what George said, they were getting their intelligence from the French, and the Vichy French regime was aligned with the Nazis at this time. Marshal Pétain, in charge of Vichy France, was a papist, devout Catholic, aligned himself with the Nazi Third Reich. General Maxime Weygand, the head French general, openly aligned himself with the Nazis. Interestingly, the U.S. official assigned to Vichy France, Robert D. Murphy, is the same Jesuit-trained official who is Eisenhower's German foreign policy advisor.
That's right.
It all kind of ties in.
And that's the same Jesuit.
With Truman, just the last point I said, Eisenhower had his Jesuit Fordham handler in the White House, being Bernard Michael Shanley, also a Knight of Malta. Think about this control. So right before Eisenhower, Harry Truman also had a Jesuit-trained advisor in the White House, just like Eisenhower did, Democrats and Republicans, it doesn't matter. And Harry Truman's advisor in the White House was Matthew J. Connolly. He was, under Harry Truman, risen to executive secretary to the vice president while Truman was vice president and appointment secretary to President Truman. Jesuit-trained Matthew Connolly was indicted for bribery in 1955, convicted in 1956, and then pardoned by JFK in 1962. But this, in an interview, Jesuit-trained Matthew J. Connolly, and actually, I have this speech on my channel. Harry Truman spoke at Jesuit Fordham University in 1946, and he acknowledges in that speech that one of my most able secretaries goes to this fine institution. That being Fordham, but that being Matthew J. Connolly. I just want to highlight that. Think about just the control just on that. You have the two presidents, the ear in both Truman and Eisenhower's head in the White House. Matthew J. Connolly and Bernard Michael Shanley both went to Fordham University. And just a quote from Matthew Connolly, he said in an interview commenting on Howard McGrath, one of Truman's, Howard McGrath was a Catholic that Truman put as the Attorney General. Matthew J. Connolly said, Mr. McGrath had been chairman of the Democratic National Committee and displayed a great deal of ability. And Mr. Truman had observed him as chairman of the National Committee. And there was always another little political reason when Mr. Clark moved up to the Supreme Court to fill a vacancy, I believe caused by the death of Justice Murphy. Mr. McGrath was appointed to the cabinet, and Mr. Truman thereby solved the problem of ignoring the Catholic people and appointed Mr. McGrath. And it was the first time that two members of the Catholic faith were members of Mr. Truman's cabinet. And Aver Manhattan cites that this J. Howard McGrath in 1950 received the Medal of Mary as an outstanding Catholic layman of his time. But I just wanted to bring that up. You have back-to-back presidents. It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican in office. The Jesuit-trained advisors, are still there.
Who is that papist again? Robert for Eisenhower. Robert, what's his name?
His White House advisor was Matthew J. Connolly. The Attorney General was J. Howard McGrath.
And there's another one that his first name was Robert. I can't remember his last name.
And for Eisenhower, Murphy.
Murphy, that was it. Murphy.
And then Eisenhower's White House guy was Bernard Michael Shanley, who went to Fordham, and Shanley was a Knight of Malta as well.
Murphy is the one that Patton told he wanted to drive through Germany into Russia and stop the Cold War before it ever started. And it was shortly after that Knight of Malta, William Donovan, murdered George Patton.
Yeah, but just coincidentally, it must be. And Murphy denounced that idea as like quote crazy. Like,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
absolutely.
Like, why are you trying to take out our Jesuit-controlled Soviet Union? You can't be doing that.
Absolutely crazy that you would want to go after. Yeah, right. The Jesuit fabricated communists in Russia. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, you bet. As a matter of fact, half of the Roosevelt administration were Soviet agents. So yeah, it's crazy that you want to go after them like that.
Oh, and it's just the Lend-Lease, and people want to see like this. I recommend Anthony Sutton. He's more of a specific, because he doesn't really go into the big picture net per se. But in terms of just financial information, Anthony Sutton is a great source. But he details in his book Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development the massive scale of the Lend-Lease program. Like the United States gave Jesuit-trained Stalin literally like it's crazy. Like you're talking like 100,000 trucks. Like they would disassemble entire plants, send it over to Soviet Russia. Wires, everything you can think of to build up a modern economy in the 21st century. Like every single electrical piece of equipment you could think of was sent to Jesuit-trained Stalin. And like they were sending him all this equipment. This was after the time he had like the gulag set up. Like he had the purge against the farmers already in the Soviet Union. He already like the Soviet Union already became like a very repressive regime. He had devout Catholic, Polish Catholic Felix Dzerzhinsky, who wanted to become a Jesuit priest, was leading the terror, like the brutal Soviet Cheka secret police. Which is just as repressive, as like the Nazi secret police. And the Nazi secret police, the SS, like was modeled off of the Jesuits. G. Gordon Liddy, even admits that. I did a blog post like highlighting that quote. That Edmund Paris also quotes a Nazi Walter Schellenberg, claiming that Heinrich Himmler wanted to model the Nazi SS directly off of the Jesuit order. But it just it just shows you like they sent Stalin all this equipment to perpetuate, the Cold War. And this Anthony Sutton shows that like the United States and Britain and Germany, European countries and the United States primarily like enabled the Soviet Union to become as powerful as they were. And you notice like the U.S. never once actually tried to invade the Soviet Union, and that's key because they eliminated like Patton actually did want to eliminate to invade the Soviet Union. They got out like the real generals, as you said, who were like taking their jobs too seriously. And over the course of the Cold War, they would just invade a bunch of like third world, countries.
That's something else that incognito Jesuit Eric John Phelps is good for. Any general that was in a position to end the war, either by being too good or too smart, like Yamamoto or Patton. Or, Patton was sidelined. He was purposefully sidelined for ludicrous reasons for most of the war. There were several other examples of excellent leaders, excellent commanders. Rommel, another great example. Rommel was forced to commit suicide, who would have ended the war sooner because that was not the purpose. The purpose of the war was to slaughter as many non-Catholics as possible, make them lots and lots of money, and set up the next level of slaughter. So, it's a great point. And you mentioned, oh my goodness, Bay of Pigs in your last, man, I'm just sitting here, literally, I'm sitting here pulling up tabs and writing notes on your last vid, Eric. We've talked about this before, and hopefully George is still there. We've talked about how the papist traitor scum in the United States government and in the West have repeatedly coaxed good people under these communist tyrannies the patriots to stick their heads up so that they can get them chopped off. And George found another example. So this goes all the way back to Warsaw in 1944, where the patriots were, as a matter of fact, there was a meeting by Roosevelt. Roosevelt had a meeting of Polish resistance right before the uprising, and he encouraged them. Yeah, absolutely. Help is on the way. And instead, the Soviets sat outside and made sure that the Polish patriots were slaughtered wholesale, purposefully held back. Then after that, it was Hungary, the Hungarian revolt. Then after that, it was Bay of Pigs, and then after that, it was
the Hungarian revolt was led by a Catholic priest agitator, Cardinal Mincenti. And,
time and time again, these bastards encourage the patriots to stand up. The West is there. The West is waiting for you. The West is going to help you.
Oh, yeah, that's literally Vincenti, like the Catholic cardinal in Hungary, like was literally promising the patriots there that like the United States like has our back. Like as soon as we go forward, this like we'll have air support. You know, he was promising them like tank support. He was promising them the whole strength of the United States Army that was going to come save them. And they never came. Just like the Bay of Pigs, you know, this like the CIA picked Manuel Artime, a Jesuit-trained psychiatrist, to be the head soldier of the Bay of Pigs invasion unit. But they promised like all those exile Cubans like military support from the United States. They were immediately captured by Castro, and obviously like the cavalry didn't come, and many of them were tortured in Castro's prison camps.
Which is the purpose. I think it's a Der Spiegel. Just incredulous of how the Soviets were moving divisions into Czechoslovakia, and NATO claimed they had no idea what was going on. Where's all your intelligence and your surveillance? Moving whole divisions in to crush the Czech rebellion. I think it was 68. Absolute high treason. And they continue to use Radio Free Europe to coax these poor bastards to stick their necks out so they can be crushed.
Well, you know, this kind of, I was going to bring this up a little later on the show, but just to tie in with the Soviet Union, like a key guy that enabled them to build up like their totalitarian power, in terms with, especially with technology, was Brigadier General David Sarnov. He was this guy was a papal court Jew that was working at the Radio Corporation of America. But while he was at the Radio Corporation of America, he negotiated a series of transfers over to the Soviet Union. And the Radio Corporation of America, along with like General Electric and Westinghouse, like mostly Radio Corporation of America, like built up like the electrical economy within the Soviet Union. You know, they essentially gave them like all of the technology that they had in the United States. And interestingly, David Sarnov appointed a literal papist, Frank Folsom, to the board, to chair the board of the Radio Corporation of America in 1949. Frank Folsom was a Bohemian Club member, a Knight of Malta, a papal cape and sword, educated by the Jesuits at Georgetown and Fordham. And this ties in just with Epstein because I think it was General Sarnov's granddaughter, and this Brigadier General Sarnov is also giving RCA tech and patents to the Nazis. That's in Charles Hyham's book, Trading with the Enemy. But David Sarnov's, I believe his granddaughter, Conchita Sarnov, she's not Jewish though, she's Catholic. She went to Sacred Heart University. She published one of the first books, I believe, on the Jeffrey Epstein case. And I've been reading through some of it, and it's just, you know, gatekeeping at its finest.
Absolute fluff.
She admits, like, the Catholic Sarnov admits that she's like friends with Ghislaine Maxwell, who is in the picture with Epstein with the Pope. You know, for instance,
she's got the tell-all expose, doesn't she? And wait, and now the grandfather was a Jew, and yet she's a Catholic, so it's the perfect family.
And you know, and I think like, and he was like, I think he ultimately, well, I think him appointing like Frank Folsom is literally like probably the most prominent Catholic layman in the United States. Like in 1968, Folsom became like a personal advisor to Pope Paul VI. Frank Folsom, who this Jew David Sarnov appointed as chairman of Radio Corporation of America.
Yeah, another media.
You know, it's odd to me, and then his granddaughter becomes a Catholic, and like I don't know. I'll link the book. It's called Trafficking, but it just shows like, you know, the full-on Catholic gatekeeping of this Jeffrey Epstein case. As you said, that the disinformation agents that are working for Rome always try to get to the truth first to steer it in the direction that they want it to go. And this Conchita Sarnov is an example of that, because her book on Epstein, I think, came out in 2016. And she went on all the controlled media channels, the alternative media channels like RT and a few others like that on YouTube to give, you know, interviews, supposedly like exposing to us like how deep the Epstein case goes. She never once mentions, I don't think the word Catholic's even in the whole manuscript. You know, for instance.
What a surprise.
Not really, no mentions of like the Black Book, no mentions of the names like Flavio Briatore that I brought up that are connected to Epstein, devout Catholic. No mention of Papal Knight Conrad Black. No mention of Papal Knight Rupert Murdoch. No mention of devout Catholic Tony Blair. No mention of Andrew Cuomo, Jesuit-trained devout Catholic. And so on and so on. Like there's so many. Like she really like only brings up, from what I've seen, like a few of the Jewish people, associated with Epstein. Very predictably, she hammers on the Wexner guy from Victoria's Secret. Because he's Jewish.
He's a Jew. Yep.
It's just like I'm going to link the book so people can read it, but it's a powerful example of how Catholic gatekeeping works. And the Tsarnov is a member of like the aristocracy. Like she says in the book, I was close with the former president of Colombia, who she admits was on Epstein's logs. What was his Paranas? Let me pull up that. She admits that she was close with the ex-president of Colombia who was flying on Epstein's plane. And then there's this one part of the book where she's like, because the president of Colombia was with her, Chokita Tsarnov, when she was meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine Maxwell, she says, like in the book, like jumped on her. Like Ghislaine Maxwell apparently jumped on Chokita Tsarnov's back, kind of, and I guess in a playful way. And she says, I was embarrassed that the president of Colombia knew that I was close with Ghislaine Maxwell. That's how she worded it. Let me pull up that. The name of that president here.
Yeah, I'll go through my list. George, you just speak up. I'll go through my list here and of the topics. Oh, you guys want to talk about the Amazon Synod at all? I know that Hawkeye says he's getting kind of thrown by all this Catholic nomenclature. A schismatic Hawkeye is someone that a Catholic claims is not part of the group. We're technically schismatics. We're more heretics than we are schismatics. But I was pointing out that the militant, Michael Voris, is now throwing, because the Catholic Church is and always has been far left, communist, pro-abortion, pro-sexual deviancy. It's nothing new. And that's the biggest problem with what Michael Voris does. He is part of the machine. He helps the machine. He keeps the Latin Mass Catholics on the plantation. He lets them think that there's a good old days that they can return to, where they don't have clergy that rape little boys, and where it's the good old days where you have all the old George. Give me all the old propaganda movies with Bing Crosby and portraying a priest, and Give me some of the other Irish Roman Catholic actors that they had with these.
Well, people know Bing Crosby's, he moved his house to the Jesuit campus at Gonzaga. He literally lived at the Jesuit campus.
Yeah, didn't half his family go to Gonzaga as well?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, he was another like just super Catholic, like over the top. And just before we go, the name of the Colombian president that was close with Conchita Tsarnov was President Andres Pastrana of Colombia. This guy's Catholic, and he was also on Epstein's flight log. That was the name I wanted to bring up. The gatekeeper kind of just in passing, mentions that I'm close with this guy.
Yeah, that's weird. His name never really came up in the news reports or on the as an Epstein friend. That's odd. Yeah, it's really odd that Epstein kind of blipped in and out of the media too. He doesn't seem.
Oh, and to tie it into Boris, I haven't really seen the church militant at all covering the Epstein debacle. Have you? Does he have?
Great point. Yeah. No, he completely avoided it. Yeah, I've never seen a single report from the militants on the Epstein scandal. Completely avoided.
You think this in terms of them, I'd say they're more, I guess, quote unquote right wing in their views. So I would think maybe they would attack Bill Clinton and some of the Democrats.
Yeah, they are huge. They are huge conservatard gatekeepers.
Because the Democrat connections to Epstein, even the guy who's credited with creating Bill Clinton's post-presidential career, Doug Band of the Clinton Global Initiative, had 35 entries on Jeff Epstein's list, and Doug Band has 2 Georgetown degrees and is a member of the Boys Club of New York. These are targets that you'd think that the right-wing media would go after.
Yeah, they remind me of the Flynn family, the Irish Roman Catholic Flynn family, that the general who was in charge of the Defense Intelligence Agency made a big stink about how the Hillary Clinton group being led by John Podesta, who now has his own column at the Washington Compost, are pedophiles. And as soon as their boy, who was also a pedophile and also a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, got into the Father Andrew White House, the story disappeared. Absolute frauds. Absolute frauds. If you really cared about the kids being raped, you wouldn't continue to just pack it up and shut up and go home after your boy got into the Father Andrew White House.
Well, and the Jesuits worked really hard, Johnny, to suppress this. I mentioned this, I think, briefly just earlier in the show, but this is a key name. This the lawyer. I'll link some of these links in the chat so people can read the comments of this Jesuit trained lawyer. But one of the prominent lawyers representing the Epstein victims literally has 2 Jesuit Georgetown degrees.
Yes, Scarola.
Jack Scarola, yeah, and he was making some blasphemous, he was on the Miami Herald documentary on Epstein, saying that we're gonna get to the bottom of this. Gaslighting, just like how Catholic William Barr was gaslighting, the exact same way. And I recommend people check out this Jack Scarola, character, because he has a quote where he said that Jeffrey Epstein might as well have been dead during this whole proceeding.
Yeah, what a coincidence that
a coincidence that he actually ended up dying. You know what I mean?
That Epstein's back in the news, George. And the victims are coming out, and it's a Jesuit-trained lawyer that's leading the charge. What a coincidence. George, you finally come back to us?
Yes, I'm sorry. There again, I was having some technical issues. Okay, you were talking about what were some of the famous Catholic movies of the 1930s and 40s, such as you're talking about Ben Crosby. He did a couple of films where he played a priest. At least one of which was with Ingrid Bergman. They were The Bells of St. Mary's and Going My Way. Around that time, you had Boys Town. I know you've talked about this before. Noose Rockney, All American, Gabriel over Washington. So you had all these films that came out in a short period of time. They're just pure movies for the Catholic Church because they're glorifying Rome. They're glorifying her priestcraft, and everything was swell. Boy, you know what? I want to be a Catholic. I want to be a priest, or if you're a girl, I like to be a nun when I grow up because they look wonderful. They're funny. They're goofy. They're athletic. They're talented. They can sing. They can dance. They can do everything. So, yeah, they make Rome. These films made Rome look great. So those were the good old days. And you had, as I mentioned to you before, the 1940 film Newt Rockney All American served as a launching pad for Ronald Reagan.
And George, the Jews at Metro Goldwyn Mayer did the propaganda film for Boys Town. What are the Jews falling all over themselves to give Boys Town the farm where they get all the little boys to rape, including Charles Manson? Well, why the Jews in Metro Goldwyn Mayer falling all over themselves to do propaganda?
Well, it's interesting because I think it was Jack Warner's studio, which I believe is Metro Goldwyn Mayer. Jack Warner produced the Fighting 69th movie, which is one of the most biggest Catholic propaganda movies. I think.
With the devout Roman Catholic James Cagney, right?
Yeah, Cagney and Pat O'Brien. Pat O'Brien
has also played a lot of happy, nice priests.
Yeah, he went to the. I think he went to the Marquette Prep School with which is Jesuit with Spencer Tracy at the same time, and then both Pat O'Brien and Spencer Tracy went into naval intelligence together. Are you kidding me?
There's another.
But Joe,
there's naval intelligence again, George.
With Jack Warner, though, just this was in the biography on Joseph Breen, Jesuit-trained head of the Production Code Administration. Just Joe Breen, when Jack Warner was making the Fighting 69th, assigned a Catholic priest to be an advisor to Jack Warner, the Jew, while he was making that movie, The Fighting 69th.
Very helpful, George. Do you want to keep going?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Eric. So you're just laughing when Eric was talking about naval intelligence. So let me see if I can figure this out. Intelligence is good. Military intelligence, I know they say that's an oxymoron, but military intelligence, when you actually need useful information, they're not very good. But when you need them to do harm, they're excellent. such as examples like you're just talking about Czechoslovakia a few minutes ago, the uprising in 1968. Well, they apparently fell down on the job there, informing the local Czechs about all the Russian tank divisions that were coming their way. And they fell down on the job when it came to Pointe du Hoc in 1944 during the Normandy invasion. They fell down on the job, before Pearl Harbor, before 9/11, as I said. But if you need to manipulate people's emotions, if you need to make good propaganda films, they're your boys.
Sure, agreed. Yeah.
Well, even recently, I put this on my. I think this is according to John W. Whitehead. He's not, I think, the most reliable of sources, but he gives a good info occasionally. I put this the video on my channel, though. I don't know if you saw it, that Pentagon video where they're warning about 2020 or 2030, how there's going to be like a dystopian future of mega cities, and they imply that like martial law will be declared. That's like the implications of that whole video. But apparently, like a Hollywood director directed that Pentagon film. And according to the Intercept, like that Pentagon film was being shown at like the like their intelligence courses that they were giving at the war colleges.
Oh, the Intercept.
So there's like, you can see, like, if that's true, you can see Hollywood and the current Pentagon are working one and the same. Both are controlled ultimately by the Jesuits. The Pentagon was modeled off of the Villa Farnese, like the whole structure, and a Jesuit, Daniel A. Lord S.J. drafted the official Hollywood production code back in 1930. People don't seem to be aware of that, but the actual official Hollywood code was written by a Jesuit priest. Just like the Pentagon was modeled off of a Farnese war villa, and the Farnese are a Jesuit controlled black nobility family. It was a Farnese pope that signed the bull to create the Jesuits. And you pointed out, Johnny, interestingly, the bull to create the Jesuits has the name like Church Militant in the name, doesn't it?
Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I'm really, and something else that never ever comes from the militant is he never points out that his bad guys are Jesuits. He talks all the time about James Martin and Jorge Bergoglio, and he never ever mentions that they're Jesuits. In fact, he turns around and promotes Ignatius Loyola on his Twitter account.
Yeah, I saw that. He does like Catholic quotes of the day. He had a Loyola quote up there.
Yeah, and he talks about how bad liberation theology is and social justice, and he never mentions that those are all Jesuit agendas. As a matter of fact, it was Tapparelli, the Jesuit Tapparelli, that came up with the terms social justice and liberation theology. So I really think that Voris is controlled opposition. Well, he absolutely is controlled opposition. I think he's read in. I think he knows what he's doing, and I'm really disappointed.
Well, I think that Steven Anderson. I think that flash is a sign that he's read in. That he didn't.
Yeah, he flashed that picture of the homosexual Jesuit Steven Anderson clowning around, pretending, mocking real Christians. I think he knows what he's doing. It's really a shame.
It is shameful, but people got to realize, like, I think older books on the paper on the Jesuits are important to read from the 1800s, like Theodore Greisinger's book, Giovanni Niccoloni, for instance, R.W. Thompson, because these authors show, like, they quote Jesuit authors and like the opinions that the Jesuits had on Protestantism in particular at this time. And it's interesting to compare what the early Jesuits thought of Protestants and what Michael Voris thinks about Protestants.
Yeah, Voris.
One and the same, because the early Jesuits say, like, the Protestants have no position, like the Protestantism is not even, like a religion, it's a heresy, like it's and that's basically what Michael Voris promotes. He promotes that Protestantism, is a heresy, that has no legitimacy,
well,
and etc.
If I could mention something, I remember watching a video of Voris back in 2010. And he was gloating on the fact that Sandra Day O'Connor and John Paul Stevens had both resigned. Therefore, they're the last two putative Protestants of the Supreme Court. And I do say putative. I've already talked about John Paul Stevens, about how he was a high-level Freemason. So,
George, didn't you also barely find that? Did he get a award from Fordham, or did he just speak at the Jesuit school?
yeah, I think so. He got some sort of. He spoke there. They all do, even though they may not actually be technically Catholics themselves, because if you're on the U.S. Supreme Court, you had to go to Georgetown to give a speech, to accept an award, or something. That's just how it works, and it's true if you're on the circuit courts, if you're on your state Supreme Court. And I'm sure that the situation is the same up in Canada. The judges have to do the same thing there, or if you're in Europe or wherever it is you are. So anyhow, so back in 2010, Voris was gloating on the fact there are no putative Protestants on the Supreme Court, and he said, "Wow, so that must mean Protestantism is dead in America! Yay!" So he basically said, "Amen, hallelujah, thank."
Voris,
Oh, really? Well, I'll have to watch that. Wow, I'll have to get that clip.
Voris savages real Christians just as much as he savages the pedophile priesthood. It really is aggravating.
Well, yes, and if I could say so. Anyhow, you had to when looking at people, when looking at politicians, judges, whatever. I look at certain things. Is he a Freemason? Where did he go to school? What is his religion? What is the religion of his wife? Where did he send his kids to school? All those sort of things. But also, one of the things I had to look at is does he have any sort of nexus with intelligence, U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence, or anything like that? To me, that's automatically a red flag.
Oh, yeah. You got every indicator you need from Michael Voris as a self-professed former homosexual, hyper-devout Roman Catholic, and journalist, news producer. I mean,
well, I was mentioning the thing about intelligence. Something he mentioned in broadcast is his dad was retired Air Force. Now, I don't know what his father did in the Air Force, but for what it's worth, Rachel Maddow, her dad was career Air Force. There again, I don't know what he did.
Hey, she's another great example. A still practicing homosexual who said her upbringing was very devout Roman Catholic, and now she's a journalist.
No, but
Michael Voris is just. I noticed, I saw a video where he was wearing a T-shirt, but it looked like he has a bigger build to him, and just guys with military training, aren't skinny twigs, if you will. Guys with military training, lift weights, and and the such. So maybe that's a sign also. I just noticed, but Michael Voris does have a bigger build to him. So that would maybe give credence that he has some military training. And I would also just mention that he's getting some serious funding from for his church militant also. He just in 2 or 3 years, his website, has exploded. I bet there's some serious, serious money coming in from some big, powerful, Catholic donors onto his website. And it's all as we said to keep Latin Mass Catholics on the reservation.
No,
I think it's an important point to think out because Charles Coughlin, Michael Voris kind of does the same donation tactic as Charles Coughlin. He's just donate, just give me $1 if you can, but just send $1 a week, give what you can. And that's exactly what Charles Coughlin would do back in the 1930s. And Charles Coughlin would make millions and millions of dollars by getting Catholics to, people would donate more than just $1. Voris, he has a pretty big following now. Church militant, has over 400,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's getting pretty big. There's been some even columns about them in the New York Times and I think the Washington Post even.
Well, okay, could I chime in on that? So he talks Michael Voris and his crew, the church militant. He has various other people whom he works with. They're talking about the so-called liberal media, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post. Well, he fails to mention the fact the Washington Post, its head is Mark Thompson, who went to Was it Ignatius or Stonyhurst?
Oh,
One of those.
that's the Times. Yeah, Mark Thompson though. Yeah, before he was the head of the New York Times, he was in charge of the BBC. Yeah, he went to Stonyhurst.
Okay, Stonyhurst, and one of the Donald Graham is on the board of directors of the Washington Post, and he's a son of Robert Graham, who was like the editor there decades ago. Well, anyhow, I don't know her name, but Donald Graham's wife went to Georgetown. So, when he's talking about the left wing, so-called left wing or liberal media, i.e., the New York Times, Washington Post, the same people run them who run Church Militant.
Well, absolutely. Maybe there is some because the Washington Post got into an official $600 million contract with the CIA.
Oh, of course.
And just looking into church, there's probably definitely is a CIA connection to Church Militant. Because this wasn't Boris, but one of Boris's assistants. I saw him giving a speech at Church Militant, and he was almost shaming the audience, saying you have to go to confession. There's no excuse for all of you not to go to confession every single week. You confess your sins to your local priest. And that just smacked to me of an intelligence operation.
I like that thought, just like I like the accusation that my buddy Rob gave that Greta Thunberg is probably a victim of sex abuse, child sex abuse.
I'm liking that too. I think it makes sense. She's propped up like crazy. I showed. I don't know if you saw my last post. I did the Marinol missionaries. Compared her to the Virgin Mary. Bringing in all that new Fatima.
Right.
And the planet superstition.
What was she met Francis on the anniversary of some encyclical or something like that?
Oh, Vladio C. Yeah, and actually, and on her in that video on my channel, she has a little advertisement paper where it says support our school strike, and it says in honor of Vladio C. On her paper.
Yeah, but it's all coincidental. It just happened to fall into place perfectly for her like that.
And I think it's just I've started watching more of some of her UN speech, of her breaking down at the UN. I don't know. I think she's definitely unstable. That's 100%.
Right, which is fine.
Which leads credence to that. There's some, and as your book Eaters of Children, shows those that become empowered onto the main stage are those who get down with the.
Very often, young people who are elevated and given positions of fame and fortune, they're done that as a reward. They are one of tens of thousands. They're a tiny, tiny minority, but they're one of tens of thousands who are rewarded for the fact that they were a good little victim and were repeatedly raped and abused. All the big pop singers, from Miley Cyrus to Justin Bieber, the extreme, the tattoos, the haircuts, the instability, the mental instability, they all show signs of being repeatedly raped and abused as children.
Well, people got to realize, why are so many celebrities depressed all the time? You see it all the time in the news. Why are these people depressed? They should have everything in the world that makes them happy. They got all the money they want. They got the big house. They have the universal respect of all of their peers. So a lot of people think people should just think on that. Why are so many of these celebrities always depressed? You always see it in the tabloids. Every other week.
If I could mention something on this girl Thunberg, Greta Thunberg. As I mentioned to Johnny on the phone the other day, her mom is or was an opera singer. Her father is an actor, and her grandfather was a famous director. So how is it that this girl is picked up somewhere, where she's from in Sweden, in obscurity, and she becomes an international celebrity overnight? She meets with Jorge. She goes to the UN. She meets with Barack Obama. She meets with Al Gore. And she's able to rub elbows with all these people. She comes to America and goes on to all these talk shows. How is it you're able to be catapulted from obscurity to being, as I said, in the spotlight. Everybody,
Having the full moral support of the Jesuits.
Yes, I mean, how? I mean, you could say, how is it that Jeff Epstein, 40, 45 years ago, taught at a private, no-name school, well, fairly prominent school in New York City, Dalton, and he, technically speaking, he wasn't qualified because he did not even have a degree. So Donald Barr, the father of William Barr, the current Attorney General, hired him. So he was only there for a couple years, and he became a hedge fund manager. So how isn't these people go from being nobodies to being a household name in almost instantaneously?
Well, I think it's that allegorical deal with the devil, if you will, with the Catholic Church. They essentially you essentially sell your soul to the Jesuit conspirators. I would say those that those that do sell their soul, you say it figuratively and literally. Those that get most that are fully behind the agenda get promoted. Bill Clinton was sold his soul to the Jesuits, and after he left the presidency, he made millions and millions and millions of dollars giving speeches all over the world.
It's really
he would charge people $200,000 for a speech. What? Are you kidding me? That's more money than most Americans will make in a span of 6 years. He's making this off one 10-minute speech.
The more willing you show yourself to be to commit heinous crimes and acts, the more you're in, the more you are assured to be on the team and for your loyalty to be to the machine once you're there. Because you've already done so many despicable, heinous things, you wouldn't dare betray your masters.
Well, absolutely. I bet a lot of their Jesuit masters have incriminating photos and videos of a lot of these people. They got the Bohemian Grove rituals, for instance, which have full police protection by the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department,
and which are taken care of. The custodians of Bohemian Grove and the Bohemian Club are the Roman Catholic Knights of Hubertus. Nobody ever mentions that.
No, that's a great point, and you're right. That's literally never mentioned in the supposed alternative media. Which I think
they're based in Jesuit-controlled San Francisco, dominated by the University of San Francisco, which is a Jesuit university. And San Francisco is the epicenter of Jones and Milk and Moscone in the 70s, and the Jonestown massacre thereafter. And Jerry Brown.
Absolutely. Going back farther, that was the playpen of Pietro Amado Giannini, the Knight of Malta.
Yeah, Bank of America.
According to Der Spiegel, he was used as Der Spiegel literally says he was used as a straw man by the Jesuits to create Bank of America. Are you kidding me?
And Feinstein was also part of that Jesuit cabal. As a matter of fact, I have to look him up. One of the first milk carton children was a little Irish Roman Catholic boy.
Kevin Collins,
there from the Jesuit diocese, who's going to a Jesuit school in the Jesuit parish there. As a matter of fact, the Jesuit parish is on something like corner of. Oh, I can't remember. This is something like corner of. It has Freemasonic overtones as well as being a Jesuit parish. I'll have to look them up. Good job on that name, George. Right off the top of your head. Good for you.
Well, you know what? This happened almost literally in my backyard. So I remember when this actually happened. Speaking of my backyard, if I could just mention a couple of things that are in my backyard. You're talking about Bohemian Grove. I live about maybe 30 miles, 50 kilometers from there. So it's fairly close to me. Now, as I mentioned before, I live in Sonoma County, which has a population of about maybe half a million people. The seat and largest community in this county is Santa Rosa. It has about 160,000 people. The next largest town is Petaluma. It has about 60,000 people. That is where Polly Klaas was kidnapped from back in the early 1990s. Okay, so just sharing a few factoids with you. As I mentioned before, the district attorney for this county is Jill Ravik. She got her JD from University of San Francisco. The current mayor of Santa Rosa is Tom Svedhelm. He got his undergrad degree from St. Mary's College. The chief of police of Santa Rosa is Rainer Navarro. He got his University of San Diego. I mentioned Petaluma. The chief of police is Steve Savino. He got his undergrad degree from St. Mary's College. The founder of Runnet Park, which is the third largest community in the town of the county, and is adjacent community, was Morris Fredericks. He went to St. Vincent de Paul High School in Petaluma and got his law degree from University of Santa Clara. The owner of the local daily newspaper, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, is Larry Amadoro. He's a member of St. Eugene's Catholic Church in Santa Rosa. He also owns all the local radio stations because he has a consortium called Sonoma Media Group. You're talking about half a dozen AM and FM channels. So would it be safe to say the whore has an absolute lockdown on this county?
Yeah, that's pretty profound. Wow. And if people aren't aware, when you mentioned Santa Clara, that's the Jesuits advertise it as the Jesuit University Silicon Valley.
Well, also one of the things.
So that kind of implicitly says that Santa Clara, is controlling Silicon Valley, and Pope Francis, the Jesuit, toured Silicon Valley. I think that was 2 years ago now. I'll find there's some articles that are written about that.
Okay, and if I could just mention one other thing about my neck of the woods. The previous mayor of Santa Rosa, Chris Kersey, he went to Regis High School in Denver. Now, under his watch back in 2017, Santa Rosa became a sanctuary city a year before the state of California did. So it's almost comical, it's almost cartoonish how much control they have for such a small area. But people will often be fooled by size. Well, it has importance. This is where Bohemian Grove is. So
yeah, George, let me throw in little Kevin Andrew Collins was 10 years old when he was abducted. He was chosen to be one of the first milk carton kids. Not a single child has ever been rescued from child trafficking from that milk carton propaganda. He was going to Jesuit St. Agnes, it's a parish, both a Jesuit church and a Jesuit school on Masonic Street in San Francisco.
Wow, Jesuit school on Masonic Street? Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, that was poor Kevin Collins' his school and his Catholic church. Couldn't run by the Jesuits.
It must just be a coincidence too that the motto of the 32nd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the Prince of the Royal Secret, is Ad Morgium El Gloriam, none other than the motto of the Jesuits.
We could do a whole show on how these non-Catholic secret societies are just bitches and foot soldiers of the Catholic Church. Even the Ordo Templi Orientis, Aleister Crowley's OTO, the degrees, there's like 12 degrees, and half of them are overtly Roman Catholic.
Oh yeah, and even Doc found this one of his names for his what was it? One of the Gnostic temples actually even has the word Catholic in the name. What was the name of that?
Yeah, he did some of his most heinous work. Pardon me, of raping children and calling out demons and having mothers have sex with their sons and so forth. He did that in Sicily. He had a special little location there in Sicily where he was conducting these satanic experiments.
Well, did you see that? I'm sending you this. The Jesuits had a pagan witch come teach at one of their schools. Is that almost like an endorsement of
Listen,
Satanism and
let
the
me
dark
go
arts.
ahead. Good for you. Let me go ahead and hype this book that it's taken me like a year to write this friggin' book. I'm going to take care of all of the Satanist, witchcraft, Roman Catholic connection, and it's going to come mostly out of France. And I'm going to tie it all together in this upcoming book.
Oh, fantastic! Looking forward to that. Sure, that'll be good. I'm sure there'll be lots on Catherine Medici. She's like
Catherine de Medici,
a
Reyes, Catherine de Shays. There's a bunch of names of these people who were all together. They were devout Roman Catholics, and yet they were deep into witchcraft and Satan worship.
You know, Johnny, I just reading through this article here. I want to confirm this. Yeah, this witch here that was hired by the Jesuits in 2002. His last name is Crowley. His name is Vivienne Crowley, and it was at Jesuit Heathrow College, part of the University of London. I wonder if that. I don't know. Maybe I have to stretch. Maybe Vivienne Crowley to Aleister Crowley. I'll have to look into that. But that wouldn't surprise me, because Aleister Crowley has a quote where he says, "If the Jesuits don't abide by the ends justify the means, I do." That's a quote from Aleister Crowley. The guy called himself like the Beast, like 666.
Yeah, and he was also an agent for MI5. So he's thoroughly controlled the entire time. And the fact that he's a household name means that he's just a front man. And this is the guy that calls out the Jesuits for not being Jesuit enough. Come on, what a clown!
Oh, I agree, and he's definitely he's. There's a lot of propaganda though, like pointing to that he's like the genius of the New World Order, which is kind of silly. He's
right.
He said he's an MI5 agent. He's just a pawn or cog in the machine. He's not the architect of the New World Order. But you'd be surprised. There is a lot of that stuff out there that Aleister Crowley is like the mastermind of the New World Order. I don't know where that comes from. Probably comes from Jesuit propaganda. Because even like the Leo Lehman mentioned this, like the guy Leo Taxil, this was a Roman Catholic in Germany. This was in Behind the Dictators where this comes from. But Leo Taxil like fabricated a bunch of like hoax conspiracies connecting, I think it was Freemasonry and the Jews in this like occultic conspiracy to take over the world. And Leo Taxil was like honored by the popes. Like Leo Lehman shows that in Behind the Dictators. But so the Jesuits do to promote conspiracy theories that the conspiracy theories that they're not a part of. If you know what I mean, like they'll promote a Protestant like Jewish conspiracy theory or like an occultic, Satan worshiping conspiracy to take over the world. But like all those conspiracies conveniently leave out of the picture of the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, okay. If I could
I
just
just want to mention that this guy, if you haven't heard that name, is Leo Taxil, was this Catholic conspiracy hoaxer, mostly tying in the Jews with the Freemasons at the beginning of the or end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And this Leo Taxil's hoaxes, tied into the protocols of Zion, which at that time drove up a lot of the anti-Semitic superstition, which we then saw being enforced in the Catholic governments of Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Francisco Franco, Ante Pavlich, and the rest.
Well, if you read the propaganda of the Falange, which was they're essentially the Spanish Nazis of the 1930s. In Franco's speeches, he would often say, basically, let's make Spain great again. But in order to do that, we had to get rid of the Jews, the Freemasons, and the communists. Even though Franco himself and almost everybody in his administration and government were high-level Freemasons. And
Freemasons and joint Freemasons while being Opus Dei. So the hypocrisy is kind of incredible.
Okay, so this is the psyop. Johnny has talked about this before. People like Michael Voris and so-called conservative Catholics who say, "Oh no, don't be a Freemason. It's wicked. It's evil." Yes, that's true, but they never mention the fact that it was the Jesuits who created modern Freemasonry. And they'll point out so-called Latin Mass Catholics like Morris and others, Patrick Coffin, let's say, the church has overwhelmingly condemned Freemasonry. There have been a number of popes that have issued bulls saying, "Oh no, you cannot be a Catholic and be a Freemason." Well, yeah, this brings up the whole subject of open but false and secret but true policy. Yes, of course, the Catholic Church is officially against communism and socialism. She's also against sexual deviancy and perversion. But they have been the greatest promoters of all those things. They created modern communism.
Oh, great! Oh, fantastic point. Yeah, people, there absolutely is an open but false policy with the Catholic Church. People just, I don't know if it's just I don't, people don't read, so people just, like, the problem is, like, most people, like, are just kind of, like, passive to who the Pope is. They're like, they don't even, like, they think he's just some, like, old guy in, like, a white robe that, doesn't have any sway over, like, world politics or anything like that. But yet all of the world's leaders, go bow down to him and kiss his ring as soon as they're elected. But he has no influence. That's like the mindset people have. So with this completely passive mindset, they overlook everything about the Catholic Church. And I like what you said, that the Catholic Church creating communism is a verifiable fact, which is documented. Historically, the Catholic Church creating modern Freemasonry is documented, admitted by Masonic authors like Albert Pike or Albert Mackey wrote the Masonic Encyclopedia. In the Catholic Church, like, just look at all the scandals. They're clearly the biggest, like, sexual deviants in the world. Like, they had that. What was the year? It was 2002. They had the Dallas conference where they put it in writing that, like, we completely forbid priests having sex with minors, and you must report it to the police. Like, since then, since 2002, like, there's been like 50 investigations opened after that Dallas conference where they supposedly, we're going to get tough on this. So you can see it's all just a mirage, like, open but false policy.
Yeah, and that tax sale is a great place to start. Marie Joseph Gabrielle Antoine Yagan Pagas, who went by the pseudonym Leo Taxil, starting at the age of 5 years old, was placed in a Jesuit seminary. Gee, I wonder what they were doing to him all his life. And then he supposedly came out, and he's hyper anti-Catholic and also anti-Freemason. He's just basically another Voltaire, another French Roman Catholic Jesuit-trained boy with the name Marie, Francois Marie Arouet, a.k.a. Voltaire. These clowns trained by the Jesuits to be controlled opposition. And Taxil is that Vatipedia claims that Taxil is the one that hoaxed the Baphomet and things about Freemasonry and so forth. User-edited Vatipedia, a.k.a. Wikipedia.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, like, Leo Lehman claims that he was saying that there was, like, the Freemasons and the Jews were, like, devil worshippers. That's, like, the crux of the conspiracies.
Yeah,
and just kind of like today, like, Louis Farrakhan, who gets honored by Catholic churches, like, every year, it seems. Louis Farrakhan promotes that, like, there's a cabal of satanic Jews.
Oh, and it's interesting. And Vatipedia mentions that the Taxil Freemasonry hoax is promoted by Chick Publications. And that makes sense. I don't doubt it for a minute, even though everybody we're talking about is completely controlled by the Catholic Church, as is Chick Publications. They're way out there. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't doubt for a minute that Chick Publications, a big part of their corruption is Freemasonry, because they're all about the King James translation. And that's a real big plus for the Freemasons, because James the First of England, James the Sixth of Scotland,
he was a Mason.
Was a Freemason, was a pedophile Freemason, and a nominal Protestant. And his editor for the authorized King James. Now, by the way, let me pause. We had a bunch of people that's going to shit themselves over this. Pardon my language. Yes, the King James translation is one of the most accurate out there, no question. The problems that I have with it is that it's maintained in gibberish, Elizabethan gibberish that was created by Francis Bacon, a Freemason, and the guy behind Francis Bacon was a Jesuit, Toby Matthew. And Francis Bacon was the editor of the authorized King James 1611 Bible. And behind Francis Bacon was a Jesuit. So you could say the Jesuits edited the King James translation. Now, are all the modern translations far more corrupt? Yes, they are. But at least they're readable in English.
Well, I would say, Johnny, people, it's kind of like this is like the Jesuits, like, run this, run this earth. You know what I mean? Like, it was a Jesuit who wrote our calendar. So now, like, all the whole calendar, how we perceive reality, was given to us by a Jesuit.
Yeah, Christopher Clark.
These guys are masterminds. Like
your entire.
I have a picture up that Sir Francis Bacon drew, where he actually shows like a picture of the Jesuit conquest for world control under the symbolism of like a constructed Kabbalah tree with Masonic pillars. I'll pull that up here because like on the left side of the pillar, on the top of the pillar is Politica, and on the right pillar is Theologia. And as Alberto Rivera says, the Jesuits ruled the world through religion and politics, as is exemplified on that Francis. I'm gonna get that photo.
And he's the one that promoted Atlantis and the New World in North America being the new Atlantis. And meanwhile, the undertone.
Johnny, and he wrote that in Spanish. Think about that. He wrote the book in Spanish. All the early Jesuits are from where? They're from Spain. Right.
Yes. Not both Loyola and Xavier are the foundation. The Borgias are Spaniards. So outstanding. In the King James Bible that's edited by Francis Bacon, the lineages. There's the Isis, Horus, Serapis. By the way, everybody gets that wrong. It's Isis, Horus, Serapis, which is the Gnostic Trinity. Serapis is an amalgam of Osiris and Apollo. That's the Jesuit monogram. Isis, Horus, Serapis, with the sunburst. Great stuff.
Oh, my mic was muted. Yeah, but you're correct. Yeah, the female part of the Trinity is the female, or the third part of the Trinity is the female figure. Yeah, so that'd be Serapis. That's why I mentioned. You can see here's the Mason compass, kind of incorporated into this Jesuit diagram here.
Yeah, outstanding.
And
the genealogies in the Bacon edited 1611 Bible are Freemasonic faggy handshakes. Look that one up.
Well, and Manly Hall, I think ultimately was a gatekeeper, but he did good research. Like, he showed that Bacon used an identical headpiece as on his principal philosophical text, the Revum Organum. The same headpiece was on the original 1611 Bible that was used on Bacon's philosophical book. And Manly Hall has good. He did a lot of writing onto Sir Francis Bacon, and especially like the New Atlantis. It was basically like Bacon wanted to create a utopia for the philosophers, which is very Jesuitical. It kind of resembles like the Plato's Republic. You've read that book, and I would say that's actually like one of the Jesuit blueprints for creating a new world order, because the Jesuits want to be the philosopher king in Plato's Republic, because Plato viewed that a society should be completely ruled by the wise, the quote, the wise, or the quote, the wise philosophers, and the Jesuits are the wise philosophers sitting on top, making all the decisions.
And you know what's funny, and who really controls Hollywood is not the Jews, but the Jesuits. You see how much effort they put into these ludicrous myth movies. Whether it's Gods of Egypt with that good little Catholic boy Gerard Butler, or Aquaman, that is just absolutely ludicrous in its depiction of a modern Atlantis with these. It's so Catholic.
Oh yeah, Johnny. Well, one of the first. I'm pretty sure one of the first official Egyptologists is a Jesuit, Anastasius Kircher. He's known as like one of the first official Egyptologists, connecting Egypt to the city of Atlantis and all of that, stuff.
Well,
and I found just another Egyptologist, Sir Wallace Budge, of the British Museum wrote that Kircher was basically like a charlatan and a fraud. I have to look at that more, as well as the Egyptologist. He was at the British Museum. He claimed this Kircher Jesuit was a fraud. But in general, that it originates from a Jesuit. And this Jesuit Kircher was brilliant. You know, he's this guy who invented studio broadcasting. He actually invented the motion projector, like projecting like an image onto a screen. That was that same Jesuit. You know, a lot of people definitely know. So he's a very interesting guy to look into in general, because his connections to modern motion pictures and Egyptology. I just wanted to add that in, Johnny. But
not to be confused with Eusebio Kino, who was also a Jesuit involved in early movies.
Actually, isn't he also one of the originators of modern cow farming?
Yes. This is all good work from Tupper Sauce. He's got this in his book, Eusebio Kino, who was. Why is it that there's a massive genre of Hollywood films called "quote unquote" cowboy films? That's because the Jesuits are all part of the husbandry and slaughter of cattle in Midwestern America. Driving them up. What did they do? They drove them up to what city? Chicago, where they were brutally, satanically slaughtered, I think probably to this very day.
Oh, fantastic information. You know, in Chicago, George found out that during the Great Chicago Fire in Chicago, the Jesuit church didn't get burned down, coincidentally. It might just be a coincidence. There's so much.
Yeah, no, you know what? It's
the Jesuit church and some of the Catholic churches. Though
they took the rosaries that they had in Hiroshima, and they brought them over to Chicago. And those same rosaries protected the Jesuit churches in both locations.
Actually, you know, this gives credence to. I think it was Eric Phelps that said that it was magnesium flash bombs that went off at Hiroshima.
I wouldn't doubt it. Unfortunately, that is very plausible. I say unfortunately.
I think it is, because I found archive footage actually of a Jesuit, one of the Jesuits that survived the miracle of the rosary and surviving the nuclear blast, being only like 4 miles away. His name was Peter Seams, S.J. But he actually claimed it. I've had the video on my channel, and I found an archive of his disposition. I think this was at like a military hearing type of thing, but he actually claimed that he saw a magnesium light flash.
Let me tell you,
he called it a very peculiar phenomena.
Magnesium is nasty stuff. I wouldn't doubt it for a minute that magnesium, because it is a chemical burn. You can't really put magnesium out. If magnesium gets on your body, on your skin, even if you attempt to smother it, it'll still burn. And I wouldn't doubt it for a minute that all those terrible pictures of poor Japanese that are being depicted as like radiation burns, I would not doubt for a minute that they're actually chemical burns.
Oh, actually, yeah, and that's another point. John Seams said that it's just the Jesuit said it's just a rumor that there's any radiation at Nagasaki. The military guy said, like, what can you say about the rumors that deadly rays were emitted from the city? And the Jesuit said, he said it in a German accent. He's like, that is just a rumor, because he's like me and my like fellow Jesuits were walking around the city for hours after the blast, and he's like, nothing happened to me.
Yeah, and apparently it was masterminded on the ground there by Pedro Urupe, who would later be promoted to Superior General for his great work there in Japan, slaughtering millions of Japanese and letting the United States take the blame for it.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it at all. And, you know, the Vatican honored the head of the Strategic Air Command, Thomas S. Power, who was leading the firebombing raids on the whole Japanese island. Was later made a Knight of St. Sylvester and funded the Catholic school at Offutt Air Force Base, where Kathy O'Brien says like they're raping boys.
They're outside of Omaha. Yep, absolute monster.
Well, Johnny,
that's a pretty profound realization for people to have, that, like, you know, the bombs at Nagasaki were not dropped, because like it literally it defies every single law of physics that these Jesuits would be able to survive a nuclear explosion, being with only 4 miles. Like they would have been pulverized by the blast, like disintegrated. Probably a 30-mile radius would have been.
It's all a psyop. What I don't agree with Eric Phelps. I think Eric Phelps, as George, is pushing a psyop himself when he says there's no such thing ever of atomic weapons. I'm sure there are weapons of mass destruction to this very day that are absolutely devastating. I think what Phelps should be saying and purposefully isn't saying is that specifically an air-dropped atomic weapon was not possible in 1945. I have no problem believing that, George. Are you trying to jump in?
Yeah, I would just say I agree. Well, definitely, with all the just think about how much money they spend on the military. Like this year, $750 billion going to military spending. Jesuit-trained Rumsfeld admitted there's $2.3 trillion missing. Like a lot of this money could be going to, black weapons projects.
He admitted that the day before September 11th, on September 10th in 2001. He admitted that. George, go ahead.
Okay, well, all right. You're talking about things that are way beyond my purview when it comes to physics and chemistry. Okay, so you're talking about things that are way over my head. What I will say is, during the war, World War II, the name of the bombing campaign against Hamburg was called Operation Gomorrah. So Hamburg was traditionally, or since at least the time of the Reformation, a Protestant city. We've talked about other places like Dresden, but the bombing of Hamburg was just as severe. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people were killed in the bombing there. And of course, you could rationalize it by saying it did have legitimate military value. It was a major port city, things like that. But that just irks me that the rationalization for bombing places like Hamburg or Dresden or Tokyo or Japan, places like that, is the military value, because Tokyo was and is the capital of Japan. You can bomb places because they have factories or munitions or they have train stations or whatever. But when did it become acceptable to specifically target civilian populations? When did it become morally justifiable to murder civilians?
Well, that's the ends justify the means, and ultimately that's the Jesuit maxim. And ultimately, the civilians pose the biggest threat for all of the ruling, government regimes. Like the biggest threat is that the civilians will, uprise and assert power. I'm pretty sure Winston Churchill. I think I saw this in a comment. Apparently, Winston Churchill's biographer or bodyguard, personal bodyguard, wrote a book and said that Winston Churchill's biggest, threat was the British people rising up against him. That's what he was more worried about than the Nazis at the height of their tyranny. Well, I think which I think says something.
Well, it's just and how much, just talking about Winston Churchill, how much treason, how much mass murder did he engage in World War II and before that? Whether you're talking about Gallipoli, whether you're talking about the Second Boer War, I mean, how much blood did he have on his hand? And nobody ever talks about him being a war criminal or a mass murderer.
Oh, in the exact same way that Eisenhower isn't viewed as a mass murderer, or Ferdinand Foch, the late Jesuit head of the Supreme Allied Commander in World War I, who was given a sword of Loyola by Georgetown in 1921. He's not viewed as a mass murderer, at all. It's all just pointed to the Hitler Nazi boogeyman. But it's just the propaganda is just so blatant because this is just documented. American investment in Nazi Germany went up 70% from or 60% from 1932 to 1940. As Hitler was taking power. Hitler had an autographed copy of Henry Ford's book, The International Jew, on his desk. For instance. So Hitler was just, it's just the point that Hitler was completely enabled. He wasn't the epitome of evil. You know, there were people much more evil than Hitler that enabled him, like Pope Pius XII, for instance, who also is not viewed as a mass murderer like he should, or
The very first
Volodymyr Lidachowski, and it just goes on and on.
the very first incident of indiscriminate bombing of civilians took place on the order of Winston Freemason Churchill. Mönchengladbach on 11 May 1940. The British were the first to indiscriminately slaughter civilians in so-called strategic bombing is a war crime. And the British
it goes both ways. Like when the U.S. was bombing Frankfurt strategically, they somehow missed the IG Farben headquarters, like somehow, and then the CIA moved their head office into the IG Farben building. But you can see how strategic bombing works. Like they'll take out innocent civilians, but when it comes to taking out like the IG Farben head office, like no, you can't.
But the same thing with the many Catholic locations in Italy that were carefully avoided.
Oh, I bet. Just and speaking on, this is even on the picture of the Frankfurt bombing. The Catholic Church in Frankfurt was left like completely unscathed. And I know in Frankfurt, just in that case, like I think the Allies dropped 12,000 tons of explosives.
Oh, okay.
And like they missed the big Catholic cathedral. Like it's just like it's so in your face.
George, I know you've got a lot of examples also in Germany of these Catholic targets that were missed.
Okay, so here again, we just talked about this a moment ago. So the Catholics there in Frankfurt must have had the same rosaries they're using in Hiroshima. The Jesuits were using in Hiroshima and in Chicago in 1871. So if you want to protect yourselves from bombs, whether they're conventional or nuclear, you just need to have good rosaries.
I wonder if Fidel carried a rosary with him when the CIA was trying to assassinate Jesuit Fidel.
It never left. Just like in the insanely Catholic movie Hellboy, but Professor Broom, what's his name? John Hurt, I think, is the actor. Every scene, he's got his rosary wrapped around his hand, and he lets everybody see it. Devoutly Roman, just like Van Helsing, Hellboy, Van Helsing, all these crazy demon, satanic comic book movies.
Oh, all the meal! I sent you guys that article, 5 best like Catholic comic book characters by the Catholic magazine, and literally they were all like devilish characters, like Blue Devil. The character is a devout Catholic. Even like Daredevil himself.
Daredevil's very Catholic. Yeah, you bet.
Is the new guy? Isn't Thanos the new villain? Like his arm,
yeah,
is a Catholic amulet from like
Saint Thanos of Avila is based on Saint Teresa of Avila, and her reliquary, where they keep her atrophied bones. It's look up the glove where they keep the hand of Saint Teresa of Avila. It is Thanos's glove. It's a Roman Catholic reliquary for a dried up hand of a saint. It's the Jews and the Jesuits that control Hollywood.
It's so in your face, and even just like the secret agents that like in real life are all Jesuit pawns, and like the secret agents you see on TV. Like I've been watching the show Archer. Some of the episodes are pretty good, but Sterling Archer, and I think in season 2 they just briefly show this. His mom Mallory, who runs their intelligence agency is called ISIS. But and like they work with the CIA and the Vatican. In season 4, the Mallory, the head of ISIS, says, "Oh, we got some intelligence from the Vatican. We need to go protect Cardinal Caroli." I think that was like the name. But like in season 2, like the mom's just flipping a yearbook, and you see a photo of Archer because like the show there's kind of like a mystique of where did Archer go to school, because that he went to Johns Hopkins University, and I think he was like beat up by like the lacrosse team and like given a swirly, so like he dropped out, that type of thing. But like, you don't know where he actually got his diploma. But they briefly they flip the yearbook, and you see a photo of Sterling Archer in front of Healy Hall at Jesuit Georgetown University, and it's just like brief, for like 2 seconds. Like, you wouldn't catch that unless you're hip to the Jesuit intrigue. So briefly, they show a photo of Sterling Archer graduating at Georgetown, and right before that, there's a photo of him being baptized by a Catholic priest as a little kid, and like he's known in the show as like the world's greatest secret agent. You know, the examples are bound. Like Jack Ryan, like the hero of the Tom Clancy series, like is recruited to the CIA by a Jesuit priest in the fictional storyline. Like it's so over the top. Jack Ryan sits on the board of directors at the Georgetown CSIS think tank in the video game. Like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah,
they're so over the top with it. Like, you know, if you know what to look for, like it becomes like a joke to say that the Jesuits.
Exactly. If you know what to look for.
Say the Jews are controlling entertainment. It's the Jesuits that control.
You bet. If you know what to look for. I did a podcast some time ago on one of my all-time favorite B-grade martial arts movies. I think it's called Black Eagle, with good Roman Catholic Jean-Claude Van Damme and one of my favorite Japanese actors, Sho Kosugi. And it takes place in Malta, and it's a Cold War movie. And one of the actors there portrays a Jesuit priest who is in intelligence and then leaves intelligence to become a Jesuit. It's right there in your face.
Yeah, it's right there. Like the I guess they're called like Easter eggs in the movie term. Like the hints and the clues they scatter them out through Hollywood. Like we brought up in Law Abiding Citizen, Jamie Foxx's character Nick Rice goes to Fordham University, and in a dialogue he's like, "Yeah, I went to Fordham night school, and I learned that." What was the quote? He's like, "Law school's got nothing to do about law," and he that's what he was taught at Jesuit Fordham. He mentions that in the movie, like you know. Stuff like, and even I found one like the Vatican came out and proclaimed that all the Simpsons are Catholic, like Homer, Bart. Lisa.
I saw that on your channel, but I didn't click on the vid. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I looked into this, Johnny. Like you can see it. Like there's clips throughout the show where like they mention that Homer went to Catholic school. Like they sprinkle it into the show and stuff.
That is the first place I would finally dig into all the Simpsons silliness of how it is that stupid ass cartoon is able to presage so many modern, whether it's Trump becoming president or
Johnny, they had the exact same. You know when Trump was going down the escalator, like it was the exact same, like as it was in The Simpsons. Like they had Trump going down the exact same escalator bay, like identically as it was in the show.
I never felt the need to get into that until now, when you bring it up that the source of all of this is the Catholic Church. I would love to. Go ahead, George.
Walter Weiss did a video a few years ago, right after Trump got elected, about The Simpsons. Now, I know you have your qualms with Walter, and they're duly noted. Well, he talks in his very viscous South African accent, so which is very charming. But he says, "How many of you are familiar with The Simpsons?" I said, you probably heard of it, but hey, I don't watch it. I'm an adult. That's kids stuff. Well, have you ever looked into who actually writes for The Simpsons? Almost all of them have PhDs from prestigious schools, MIT, Stanford, Harvard, you name it. And they're paid millions of dollars an episode. And these people have advanced degrees in just about every subject: mathematics, physics, history, you name it. So you have these people who have advanced degrees, doctorates from prestigious schools, and they're being paid big bucks to write these episodes. So they're not doing that just because they're bored and they have nothing else better to do. They're being paid all this money to serve an agenda.
Yeah, and George, I'm convinced that agenda is to mock us. They presage these events, and then you point to a stupid adult cartoon as the source of presaging some terrible event, and you get laughed at. I'm convinced they use this. It's also like one of the longest running TV shows of all time. It's been going for like 20 years or something like that.
30. You're talking like 1989, 1990, something.
Wow.
It was a spinoff of the old Tracy Ullman show. Tracy Ullman was one of the first shows on Fox, on the Fox network. Now, this is something that I've I may have mentioned before, but Fox started like 1986, 1987, thereabouts. So you're talking less than 35 years ago. Almost all of the prominent shows on Fox initially featured Catholics. Ed O'Neill, who played Al Bundy on Married with Children, Jim Carrey in Living Color, fellow Canadian. He's, you mentioned before, he's Catholic. America's Most Wanted, featuring Irish Catholic John Walsh, whose son Adam was kidnapped and murdered in the early 1980s at a mall in Hollywood, Florida. So, as I said, almost all your prominent people on the Fox network, at least in the 80s and 90s, were Roman Catholics. So I know.
Oh, George, I think that they still are. Like, Hannity today, Rick Hemmer. All them are Catholic.
Well, I wasn't talking about the Fox News channel. I was talking about the regular Fox channel.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, but even so, faux news is just owned for wall-to-wall Catholics. Wall-to-wall, Monica Crowley, Bill Hammer, O'Reilly, Hannity, Laura Ingraham is a frequent speaker. Even Ann Coulter, that is supposedly not overt Catholic, her daddy was a hyper-devout Roman Catholic FBI man.
Oh, great point. You actually have Steve Ducey on the Fox 5 is a good devout Catholic Knight of Columbus.
Hyper-devout, and George brought up that his little boy, Petey Ducey, is the one that got the exclusive from, was it Robert O'Neill? Robert O'Neill, the Navy SEAL who supposedly one of the Navy SEALs who killed Bin Laden. There's like 5 or 6 of them, and each of them have a different story.
Oh wow! So that's all insider, all insider games.
And I'm sure, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure O'Neill is also a good Irish Roman Catholic fraud traitor who's also been on himself. Alcoholic suicide watch. Now, why would the guy that killed Bin Laden be so thoroughly depressed that he's an alcoholic and suicidal? Gee, I wonder.
Yeah, because he's been forced to lie about the whole thing. He probably feels guilty too about the treason he was involved in. I was also to mention here that Eric Thomas Bowling. Eric Bowling is a big Fox host. He is openly educated by Jesuits, I believe. Yeah, I went to high school at Loyola Academy. This guy is one of the biggest Fox News hosts still to this day. Yeah,
George is trying to jump in. And of course, Rupert Murdoch is a Knight of Malta. And Rupert Murdoch is supposedly not even Catholic, but he's very, very, he just shoved his head so far up the Pope's butt.
Oh, he has. I think you muted your mic there, Johnny. But yeah, the LA Times outed Murdoch for donating millions of dollars. Him and his wife, in the article that they were made a Knight of St. Gregory the Great, Rupert Murdoch was outed as donating millions to the Catholic Church. He's a good pal of Jeffrey Epstein. He was on the Epstein list there. And there hasn't been any objective coverage at Fox News of Jeffrey Epstein whatsoever. Let's see here, and I linked an article in the chat. I think Johnny's mic's still muted there. You there, George?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. I just you should, if you haven't read this, George, I linked it in the chat. You might find this. This was from the Georgetown blog, but someone put together here an article called Georgetown's Fictional Alumni, and they highlight some within TV shows and movies. There's lots of the main characters go to Jesuit Georgetown. Like if you know the show 24
with
Kiefer Sutherland.
Yes, Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, so he's so in 24, the President of the United States, his character David Palmer. Let me see who plays him, the actor. But the President of the United States in the series 24 goes to Jesuit Georgetown, and David Palmer is played by Dennis Haysbert. I don't know if this guy's Catholic or not. Dennis Haysbert though plays David Palmer, and the President of the United States in the Georgetown whole TV series. He goes to Jesuit Georgetown, where he graduated the BA. And on the show, David Palmer also notes he played for the basketball team at Jesuit Georgetown and hit a buzzer beater for the basketball team to get them into the Final Four. You know, it's really interesting because if you've seen the movie National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, I believe he's also Catholic, and that movie, you know, had tons of Jesuit Illuminati symbolism in it. But Nicolas Cage's character Ben Gates, the movie National Treasure, goes to Jesuit Georgetown. And the article it says here, National Treasure's main character received his degree in American history, no surprise there, from Georgetown before embarking on his extensive treasure hunts. Those are some examples.
Okay, I realize we're wrapping up. If I could just mention a couple of pop culture things, a TV show, a new TV show, and a film that was just released. Evil. I know I'm yanking us in a slightly different direction. Well, there's a show that just aired this season on CBS in America, Columbia Broadcast System, or also known as Catholic Broadcast System. As you might guess, it deals with the supernatural. It was created by Robert and Michelle King. Bob is Irish Roman Catholic, and he went to Bishop Mitty High School in Los Angeles. Now, the main character of the show is a psychologist named Kristen, played by Katja Herbers, who's a Dutch actress. Katja Herbers went to Ignatius Gymnasium, or Ignatius High School in Amsterdam. So
very interesting. They got a lot of these actors under control.
So anyhow, so the basic premise is she meets, as I said, she's a clinical psychologist, and now her character, as it turns out, is a latch Catholic. Kristen grew up Catholic, but she's no longer practicing. So she's cynical about religion and the supernatural, all that sort of stuff. But she meets a black seminarian who's studying to become a priest named David. And he convinces her to join her to help investigate these claims. So I've mentioned this to you before. We've talked about the new SWAT, SEAL Team, and all these other shows. They're openly Roman Catholic. Almost all the characters, either on the show or in real life, or both, are Roman Catholic. For example, Shemar Moore plays the new Hondo. And
actually, yeah, George, I was just going to bring him up. Actually, he was like the big Catholic star of Criminal Minds too. That popular.
Yes, and I believe he was on a soap opera year before that. So anyhow, his mom grew up. Moore's mom grew up Irish Roman Catholic in Boston, Mass. And then she moved out here and met her future husband, Shamar's dad. And they sent him to University of Santa Clara. So he has all the qualifications to be an actor. And not only just an actor, but a star on several TV shows.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think people go to the alumni page. I think a lot of Hollywood personalities have come out of Santa Clara. I'm going to pull up the alumni page here. I know it's and people should do that. I recommend everyone go to the, even just the list on the Wikipedia alumni pages. Go to all the. Let me see. Bing doesn't pull up the wiki page. I don't know why. But if you go to Wikipedia, all the Jesuit schools. So here's I'll link this. So list of Santa Clara people. If you go film and television, like there's been quite a few. Yeah, I'll list some. Actually, I'll screen share my screen here so people can see this. You may have heard. You probably heard of some of these names. George may not have heard of some of them. That's why I think it'll be worth it to go through. But so Andy Ackerman, who produced the Seinfeld show and was a director at Seinfeld, and this guy also produced and directed Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is a show supposedly controlled by the Jew Larry David, but the producer and director of the show, Andy Ackerman, went to Jesuit Santa Clara. You can see him right there.
I love that find, by the way. I absolutely love that find because Seinfeld is it's Jews on parade. almost every other episode, they're promoting like 75% of everyone involved with that show is a Jew. They bring in Jews from the outside. One episode is Bette Midler. Another episode is Woody Allen. In fact, these pretzels are making me thirsty. Very famous Seinfeld episode is the Woody Allen episode. That's just Jews on parade, and behind it all are the Jesuits.
Well, absolutely. You can see how I think you could see Ackerman was probably working with the Jesuits there to give this illusion that this is like a Jewish-dominated TV show, and it gives off more of the illusion that Hollywood is completely controlled by the Jews. Like the Catholic priest Charles Coughlin back in his day was putting out propaganda and with the Legion of Decency saying Hollywood is like Sodom Gomorrah, like the Jewish pit of like evil.
Right there. We talked about this before. You have these clowns and these pigs and these frauds. Larry David pissing on a painting of Christ and mocking Christians, not Catholics, with it on his HBO special. You've got pigs like that Sarah Silverman. Just vicious, outrageous, disgusting, despicable things. She's got an actor portraying Jesus grabbing her crotch, playing with her on something that she has done. And then you got the Catholics pushing these disgusting, despicable Jews up front and then muckraking after they do so. You got the conservatard media like L. Brett Bozo Gazelle and Joseph Farah with CNS News and WorldNet Daily. They're the ones that love to point the finger at these outrageous, despicable, Christ-hating Jews. Meanwhile, they're never going to tell you who is promoting these monsters.
Yeah, I love Joseph Farah, who runs WorldNet Daily. He's Lebanese Catholic, right?
Well, he claims to be evangelical, but he's Lebanese, and I don't doubt for a minute. Lebanon is owned by the Catholic Church. Peter Hans Kolvenbach, that was his stomping ground. He set up the war on terror, and when he was there in Lebanon. So I don't doubt for a minute that that's his secret past that no one's allowed to know about. He's supposedly evangelical Christian.
Well, just like Mike Pence had a phony conversion to evangelical.
Absolutely, great example.
Lots of them have it. And actually, this is interesting here because I watched the show. You know the show The Pacific? I think the HBO. It's kind of like a Band of Brothers. It's like the version of Band of Brothers for the Pacific War. It's entertaining. Ultimately, it's propaganda. They prop up the official story on everything. But apparently, here the screenwriter Michelle Ashford for the Pacific went to Jesuit Santa Clara, and apparently she has her own new TV show, Masters of Sex.
Oh, perfect.
That sounds pretty,
perfect.
Deviant. But apparently she was the screenwriter for the HBO miniseries The Pacific. And I'll link this in the description, but I recommend people like go through the alumni list of even just the entertainment sections of all these Jesuit schools, because you see it's you see that their influence is pretty profound. Like this is just Santa Clara that I have up here, and you have quite a few Hollywood actors, actresses, screenwriters, cinematographers, radio broadcaster. This guy's the radio broadcaster for the Toronto Blue Jays. He did it for like 25 years. Jerry Howarth. Went to Santa Clara. The current, this is a side fact, the current radio or the television broadcaster for the Toronto Raptors, what's this guy's name here? Jack Anderson went to Jesuit Fordham.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on sports and bread and circuses.
Yes, so I recommend. I recommend people definitely like take the time to go through the alumni list.
Yeah, and should we bring up Shirley Povich?
Oh yeah, great connection. Yeah, because he's another his son Maury Povich is pointed to like a lot. I think I've seen propaganda as like proof that the Jews are controlling, the entertainment.
Daytime Vomit TV and Shirley is like a Jesuit trained Jew, right?
Yes, he was. He was. I believe he just got a master's at Georgetown. Like bachelor's and master's at Georgetown. He became the Washington Post sports analyst for like 45 years.
Yeah.
Constantly blowing up the devout Catholic Babe Ruth, Knight of Columbus, as like an American hero and stuff like that. But the Jesuits named their baseball field after Shirley Povich at Georgetown. I think it's called now Shirley Povich Field at Jesuit Georgetown University. And actually, and I got the name of the Raptors. I'm gonna link this guy's bio. The Raptors announcer who went to Jesuit Fordham is Jack Armstrong. And that's interesting because the Raptors won the NBA title this year, and every team that wins the championship has some connection to the Jesuits, whether it be their announcer, the players on the team have Jesuit degrees, the owner has a Jesuit degree, or the general manager. That's always that's
Great
another
point.
rabbit hole to look into too. But
I'm just going through my old topics real quick. I know the militant claims. I've said this before. Very, very rarely. Okay, so you have so many priests who are pedophiles. Why are we not having bishops and cardinals who are getting arrested as pedophiles? They're just not allowed to because Rome selects who it is.
Yeah, Johnny, Malone in Buffalo is a perfect example of what you just said. Why hasn't he been arrested? That guy's knowingly been covering up the scandal there
Right.
for 20 years. And we covered the Buffalo cops even said themselves, retired Buffalo cops, they said that they're untouchable.
And it's interesting that the militant Michael Voris and his outfit there claims that Pell was arrested because he was threatening to clean up Vatican finances. It's possible.
Oh, that that probably, yeah, I wonder. That
It's
could
entirely possible.
that
I've
could-
never
that could-
seen. I mean, it's insane that you have the third most powerful cardinal in all the Vatican, and now, as usual, they dramatically undershot. He's had again. I keep using this example as tongue in cheek. He touched a little boy's ass in a public pool or something like that. It's never even close to what really happened. So either they're fabricating this to take him out of play as the director of finance for the Vatican, or they're just dramatically undershooting the fact that he's had a lifetime of buggering little boys. Either way, it doesn't matter.
To our point, the Jesuits blackmail everyone, and they have dirt on everyone. So a guy like Pell, who, if he was going to investigate the Vatican, they say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And they'd probably warn him, saying, if you're going to do this, we're going to bring up these, they'll say, we know about all the allegations that were made against you in Australia. We're going to bring this to the light if you try to change up the Vatican Bank. That's very possible because the Vatican does that. They killed the John Paul I died for the Vatican Bank reform.
I think that is the most plausible motive to me. That is the most plausible motive for why JP1's papacy only lasted 33 days, is because there was a threat that he was going to clean up the unbelievable corruption that was involved with the Vatican Bank. To this very day, still funding guns and abortion and contraception and all the things. I've never seen a Voris special on that one. The Vatican Bank funding contraception and abortion and guns. I'd love to see that done there, Michael. I'm not going to.
I'll link that in the chat. I documented one of the Vatican banks, subsidiary banks in Germany, the Pax Bank, which is openly run by Catholic priests. It's even on their Wikipedia page. They were investing in abortion pills. The U.S. Pill maker Worth. That's what the Catholic priests are investing in, and they're also investing in tobacco companies and weapons.
This is 20 to 30 years after the jelly scandal of the 70s and 80s. 20 to 30 years. So what sure seems to me like they're just doing the same thing year after year after year. Calvi and Jelly and all those guys that were suicided. Go ahead, George.
Well, and of course, almost all these prominent figures from the 70s and 80s and before were part. Almost all of them were part of the P2 laws to pop up the propaganda duty. So you're talking, the P2 had thousands of members, and these were the upper crust of Italian society for World War II up until the 1980s. There were mayors, police chiefs, newspaper editors, bank presidents, cardinals, bishops, you name it. Anybody who was anybody in Italy back then was a member of P2. Even though the Church of Rome is at war with the Jesuits allegedly hate the Catholic Church. Well, you could if you're something like a Michael Voris, you could spin it, well, they weren't real Catholics. They were just poser Catholics. And one of the terms he and people like like I like to mention when talking about Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or Ted Kennedy when he was alive is they were fake Catholics. They weren't real Catholics. They may have called themselves Catholics. They may have been confirmed, baptized, catechized, all that good stuff. They may go to Mass every week, but they're not real. And because they're pro-abortion, they're pro-homosexual, anti-guns, you name it. But you see, that is part of the psychological operation which Boris and his organization engages, and others like them, is they're supposed to say, oh, no, even though almost all your prominent Catholics for decades, the United States and in other countries, officially opposed the Catholic Church's social teaching on almost every subject, they're not real Catholics. So when they make their ties to the Catholic Church, when they fund the Catholic Church, are they not sending the Catholic Church real money? Are they not sending the Catholic Church real wealth?
Yeah, I'm just looking up, and I'm keeping my mic and my camera off so that I have the computer power to look this up. The P2, I have connections that P2 offered Melania to Donald Trump. She's an Eastern European Roman Catholic.
Okay, so that so Donald Trump is a Freemason from all accounts, probably Scottish Rite. And you had asked me about that. What is my source for that? There's something Eric John Phelps or somebody. But if you look at him, he's constantly making Masonic signs with the okay hand gestures, or doing the upside down triangle when he's sitting. I think it's subconscious.
Oh, definitely. I'm gonna keep my mic muted here just because the fire alarm is going off in my apartment building, so I just don't want that to get in the way of your talk. But yeah, Trump does make the Masonic hand signs everywhere, like the diamond, kind of like Merkel. Merkel does it like every single chance she gets to.
Mm-hmm. So your building's not on fire, is it, Eric?
No, it's not on fire. This happens all the time. It's a student building, and a lot of the kids don't know how to cook, and someone just left like the pan on too long or something like that. Yeah, it's not on fire.
Okay.
This happened like 20 times this past year. I'm just gonna keep my mic muted so it doesn't get in the way of your guys' talk, because it is kind of loud.
Okay.
And I'm still waiting for this article to come up that shows the connection between P2 and Melania and Trump, and Melania being a sort of a trafficked sex object. George, is that all you had?
Oh, no, I have more stuff, but I was just waiting for your response.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up here. Let's see. I have an article from the Slimes. Oh, wow. Okay, great. It's not something crazy off the wall. When Donald met Melania, Paola Zampoli was there. And I guess this clown is big in P2, which is why I put that there. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, so I'll put this link. And as always, folks, I am subscribed. I pay for the New York Slimes. You should not have to. If you guys want this full article, don't go onto their website. Just let me know, and I'll copy and paste it, and I'll get it to you. I'll put it in the chat and try to have it in the notes when I re-upload this later. So hang on here. George, keep going.
Okay. Well, something I wanted to mention is I just so I streamed an episode of the TV show Evil last week, and I was talking about that. So the actress who portrays the character, Katia Hebers, her character. So both the actress and her character grew up Catholic. The actress who plays her, Katia Hebers, went to a Jesuit school in the Netherlands. And the producer of the show, Robert King, went to a Catholic high school. So this show, Evil, is just yet another example as to how Rome thoroughly runs Hollywood. And it's not, and they don't even make the pretense of blaming the Jews in this particular episode. Now, also over the week,
those shows that delve deep into Satanism and Satan worship and Satan, and there's a show Lucifer and all that. It's got Jesuit written all over it. It has nothing to do with Jews. It's got Jesuit written all over it. They're the ones with that insider information. As a matter of fact, I was watching Venom, with Tom Hardy, and in the movie, the bad guy is feeding homeless people to aliens to be eaten up. And number one, that's what they do. It reminded me of Dan Mitrione grabbing homeless people in South America and torturing them to death as part of his classes that he was committing there. Good friend of Jim Jones. FBI man, police chief, CIA expert, devout Roman Catholic, Dan Mitrione. And he tells us one homeless guy, the bad guy tells us one homeless guy before he gets eaten up by the aliens. His name is Isaac, and he goes all into, oh, Isaac, that's a Bible name. And Isaac is the one that, God, to me, the amazing thing about the sacrifice of Abraham and Isaac wasn't Abraham's sacrifice, it was Isaac. That's the kind of deep, philosophical, satanic shit that Jesuits do all the time. That's just right, that's Jesuit all over it. Getting deep into that kind of the God that I don't know what kind of God would tell Abraham to offer up his own son, and then he goes off onto a tangent. That's got Jesuit written all over it.
Oh, 100%. Joey, what was that? I heard this on an old podcast. The alarm went off here. It must have been a false alarm, like I predicted. But you mentioned this movie in the 80s where this guy was like an assassin for God. Oh, I forget the name of the movie, bro. It was from like 85. You brought up this movie, how this guy is like basically like God's hitman. He goes around like killing people on like divine instructions. I forget the name of that movie. It was on like an old Resistance Rising podcast. It sounded very Jesuitical. And I linked this New York Times article. This was about, I think I sent you guys this, but there was a Jesuit priest who created a TV show at ABC. His name was Bill Kane, S.J. His show was called Nothing Sacred on ABC.
Yeah, that was about 20 years ago.
Yeah, it was about 20 years ago. But like, yeah, people gotta realize like this is the intrigue that the Jesuits have. Like this guy's a literally ordained Jesuit priest who like created this TV show. Like full on director, writing it, like scripts, like producing.
Well, the Hitman video games and movies. That's very Jesuitical. They are the ultimate assassins. The Hitman stuff. Let's see. There was another movie that I gotta think about. Let me close myself down and look it up real quick. Hold on.
Yeah, their control on movies is profound. Even recently, we covered the John Wick movie. Like that was pure Jesuit theater. Like the group, the table. Like they have their penance. Like, are you kidding me? Like so, and if they disobey the table, they have to like they basically like self-mutilate themselves and like torture, like the punishments of the Catholic Inquisition. So like your penance could be like 7 slashes with from a sword or something like that. They use the word penance, and then when John Wick like gets when the table like when he quote unquote betrays the table, they say like, John Wick, you have been excommunicated and deconsecrated. Like those are two Catholic terms, strictly Catholic.
And of course, John Wick is played by Keanu Reeves, who went to LaSalle University in Toronto.
Oh, great for that being a Catholic university. At least experienced that Keanu Reeves could be Catholic. Is he open? Like, has he ever said that he's a Catholic?
Well, he's never talked about his religious views. He says he's officially agnostic, but you know what? That doesn't really matter just so long as he has the affiliation. And because if you look at the Matrix movies, particularly the sequels, they tend to be, they seem, even though they're Jesuitical, they also seem to blend in elements of Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism.
Well, you know, the
Because-
Jesuits were Buddhists, or during the Confucius controversy, was back in the 1700s. That was
Well,
all about
this-
how like the Jesuits like openly like allied themselves with the Confucian philosophy over the Christ philosophy, and that was like a big schism within the church. But that should show people like the Jesuits, you know, are they have the choice to choose between like okay, we're going to practice Eastern religions or versus like the Christian philosophy. Like they chose the Eastern religions during the Confucius rites, and like,
Yeah,
you know, there was a scandal. I think the Dominicans like had a battle with the Jesuits, but then the Jesuits ultimately won, and like they were able to continue worshiping Confucius.
all these assassin movies just breathe Jesuit. Just breathe. Another one is the 2008 movie Wanted, also based on a video game, with homosexual James McAvoy of X-Men fame and Angelina Jolie, who is, I think she's practicing. I know her daddy, John Voight, is hyper devout Roman Catholic, and she's out there. I wouldn't doubt for a minute that she's been.
But the movie is just kind of like John Wick. There's like the table in John Wick is obviously a reference to the Jesuits, but there's like the what's the name of the group in the movie Wanted? They have like the assassin group that meets in secret. Like they're kind of like the elite assassins that have collected like all the information that you would dream of as like an assassin group. Like that group in the movie was clearly a reference.
Right. Yeah, and you're getting your information on who you're supposed to murder from nameless, faceless people, and you're supposed to just execute. You're being told to kill another human being by nameless, faceless hierarchy, and you're supposed
just like in the Jesuit oath, though. Don't you think? Oh, that has to be a coincidence, though, right? The Jesuit oath says if you have to kill someone if you're given
obey as if you were a corpse without your own will. You yourself are a corpse. You have to obey blindly. Very similar to the blackened out round table of the movie Spectre, which really just should have been called Jesuit. The third James Bond Daniel Craig movie, third or fourth? Yeah, third. The round table meeting of Hydra, Spectra, same thing.
Oh, I haven't watched Spectre, but you know they do put these clues. You know, again, if you know what to look for, all the signs.
Half the movie takes place in Rome.
There you go. Well, you know, another movie that they put this out in plain sight was The Third Godfather. There's that scene where Al Pacino's character, I forget, he's a Corleone family member in the movie, but he goes to the Vatican, and the Catholic priest actually sets up like a money laundering front with the mobster Al Pacino in the movie. The Catholic priest says, "Okay, yeah, we're going to set this up as a charity, and then we'll launder our laundry mafia funds through it." You know, they put that into the Third Godfather movie. Kind of, you know, there's like a 2 or 3 minute scene. I might repost it on my YouTube channel. And it's interesting that like the Third Godfather is unanimously like hated as like the worst Godfather movie by far, and it has this kind of explosive, revealing scene with the Catholic priest telling Al Pacino's character, who's a mobster, that we're going to launder money through like a phony charity we're setting up, like in your hometown, like in the movie. And I was just you know, all the signs are there in the movies. Even in the Spotlight movie, there was that one scene with and that movie was, you know, Jesuit theater in itself, because that was all about how the Boston Globe does such a great job. And actually, speaking on that, I found an interesting connection with the Globe. Just when I was doing my research on Raytheon, I found that the CEO of the company sits on the board of directors at Jesuit Boston College, the CEOs Club there, Thomas A. Kennedy. But there's a connection from the Boston Globe directly to Jesuit Boston College. There's a Boston Globe representative sitting on the board of their CEOs Club at the Jesuit College, and that's Linda Hendry, managing director of the Boston Globe. And Robert Kraft, the
25.
owner of the Patriots, who had his own kind of like little mini Epstein scandal down in Palm Beach, Florida, is also on the board at the Jesuit Boston College Carroll School of. Well, it's the Carroll School of Business that runs this, but it's the Board of Governors for Boston College's Chief Executives Club. The Spotlight movie, Walter Robinson, one of the main characters in the movie, like even in real life, in the real life investigation, he was like the lead. Like, he was the leader of the Spotlight team. He went to Jesuit Boston College High School.
Yeah, they even touch upon it. And of course, Michael Keaton is the one that plays him, also a good little Catholic boy.
It's completely controlled on all angles. And I was just going to mention there, but they interject the one scene though from that movie where Mitch Garabedian's character, I forget the actor who plays him, but the Mitch Garabedian actor says that like the Catholic Church controls everything. He says literally everything. Like there's that one scene where they're talking outside. He's talking outside, I think, to Mike Resendez in the movie. And Garabedian says, like, I'm experienced, and I've come to learn that the Catholic Church like controls like everything. That's basically like the crux of his. So it's interesting that they put that into the movie, kind of. But ultimately, the movie itself was, lots of gatekeeping going on.
That's Stanley Tucci, George, right? Yeah. The church thinks in centuries, Mr. Resendez. Tucci, I'll bet you there's some Catholic, some Jesuit breadcrumbs in his family tree.
Yeah, that was another good line though too from the movie, that the church thinks in centuries. Well, ultimately, I think Garabedian in real life is controlled opposition.
He's a gatekeeper. So is that clown, Jeff Anderson. They're gatekeepers. Snap, they're all gatekeepers. They are allowed to come out because the focus of what they do is paying off victims and not prosecuting the rapists themselves. That's their focus. Their focus is to pay off the victims and not to prosecute the rapists. So they are allowed to bubble to the surface and play their game.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, since all these scandals come out, like the Catholic Relief Services hasn't received more and more money every year from the U.S. government. You'd think that they would, stop funding the Catholic Church, as much, given all with the Boston Globe scandal, the Pennsylvania scandal, all of the pedophilia pre-scandals across the United States. You'd think that might, cause the government. But you see, that shows that the papists are in control of the U.S. government. The fact that funding has increased, just after all these disgusting scandals, they're still getting more money from the feds. Like, come on.
Yeah, and I'll bet that there's these payoffs are a drop in the bucket. I'll bet that they don't even put a dent in the Vatican finances.
Oh, not at all. I just found recently, the Vatican owns one of the biggest hotels in Jerusalem, the Notre Dame Center. This thing has to be worth probably at least probably $200 million. Like, this thing is like old ancient architecture in East Jerusalem. That's just one example of their financial intrigue. These guys are rich.
Yeah, speaking of the Vatican Bank scandal that got JP1 dead after 33 days, the Vatican Bank also owned the Watergate properties, to include the Watergate Hotel where the Watergate scandal took place.
That was a Societe Generale Immobiliare. At that point, that was like the biggest construction company in the world, 100% Vatican owned.
Yep. For some reason, nobody talks about that.
And I'll link this in the description. I found a good Daily Mail article where it talks about how the Vatican owns a bunch of property, like high-profile property in London, England. This was they acquired this property right after Mussolini signed the Lateran Pact in 1929. So it's a pretty good. There's some photos of the Vatican properties in London, England too. These things have to be worth millions and millions and millions.
Yep, Benito was their boy. He helped get them their property. He helped get them what they are.
Oh, and I think that was his Jesuit whispering in his ear was Taci Venturi. I think that was I think that had a big part to play in the Lateran Treaty. Mussolini was basically there was a Jesuit in his ear his whole life. David Kurtzer wrote about how it was the Jesuit Taci Venturi who was pushing Jewish Masonic conspiracy theories on Mussolini for years. And the Jesuit was trying to making Mussolini paranoid, and stuff like that.
Mussolini, Franco, Hitler, they were all owned by the Catholic Church.
Well, absolutely all of them were owned. Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of people don't know that, though. That's like a hidden fact of history, especially with Hitler. No one seems to know that Hitler was a Catholic.
You might get into controversy there, but it's easy to peg that on Franco. Franco maintained Inquisition tortures through his administration. For Franco, very often the Inquisition liked to play games, and they would just conduct the show trial, and then they'd turn the victim over to the secular government for the actual torture and murder. And Franco continued to do that and through the 40s, 50s, 60s. And it was Franco, along with the Catholic Church, I covered this in Eaters of Children, that was literally stealing babies of his political rivals and selling them in the on the human trafficking them. And the Catholic Church maintained this even after Franco left power, because it was so lucrative for them.
Well, that's great information, though. That shows their true nature.
Oh, and the founder of Opus Dei, Escriva, the Saint of Escriva, was his confidant. Was Franco's, the guy whispering in Franco's ear.
Well, I mentioned this before. There was a tome that came out back in 2012 by Paul Heston, and he's probably controlled opposition. It was called The Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 39, The Modern Inquisition. And one of the things that Heston mentions in the foreword is that the only difference between what happened in the 1930s and what happened in Spain in the 1930s and what happened hundreds of years earlier is the changes in technology. The Jesuits were behind the Spanish Inquisition, well, starting in the 16th century, and they're completely behind what happened in the Civil War in Spain. Because almost all your prominent figures in Franco's government, his administration, almost all of them were trained by Jesuits.
Yeah, super. Great point. Well,
and I know the Jose Escriva, the Spanish priest, and by the time Franco was late in his reign, his government was completely infiltrated by Opus Dei. But he had a quote where he said he thought Hitler got a bad rap. The Opus Dei founder.
Is Escriva sainted?
Yes, he is a saint now. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So
are you saying it was Newsweek though that had that quoted him saying that he thought he said Hitler didn't kill 6 million Jews, and he said that Hitler isn't as bad as everyone makes him out to be. That was
okay. Pause here for a moment. In order to be declared a saint in the Catholic Church, I guess you had to be the most wicked, depraved, heinous, demonically possessed person possible. You had to be responsible for at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions and tens of millions of deaths. I'm surprised they have not canonized Joe Stalin or Mao Zedong, because they were both doing the work of Rome.
Well, George, that's not fair. Look at somebody like Mother Teresa.
Well, yeah, okay.
I mean, she would have had to been personally involved in trafficking hundreds, if not thousands, of children out of India and the third world countries, and covering for monsters that were murdering and torturing and raping and pillaging. I mean, that's Mother Teresa. She would never do something like that, right?
Of course. And while we're at it, why hasn't Hitler been canonized? Or Franco, or Salazar in Portugal, or
they're probably working on it, and I think they may canonize John Surratt, the Catholic implicated in the Lincoln assassination.
Okay, and what about his mom, Mary? She should be declared a saint.
Hey, she had no fewer than 5 Catholic priests show up at her trial as character witnesses.
I would say she's basically a martyr to the church. I'd say at this point. And I'm just saying, and the Chinese are honoring the Jesuits though in their own way. Here's You see the statue here on my screen of the Jesuit. I wonder, is he a saint, Matteo Ricci? That's I wonder if he's the saint. But here's a statue of the Jesuit, and the Chinese government built this statue in 2010.
Listen, that was a completely Chinese initiative. Don't you dare pretend. Don't you dare think that there were Roman Catholic. The Chinese love their Occidental invader, Matteo Ricci, who gave the emperor his calendar, his understanding of astronomy, mathematics, basically his reality for him. Matteo Ricci is just as important in China as Sun Tzu.
Or Christopher Columbus is here in the West.
Sure. That's great, by the way. I was never able to pull that up, Eric, in the same way that I've been unable to connect the dots between Matteo Ricci and Lorenzo Ricci, the superior general in the 1700s. I'd love to see that they are related in some way. I wouldn't doubt it.
I'm sure they are. I mean, maybe like they're cousins or something. Now, by the way,
I bet they are. Because, another interesting relation. When the Jesuits were at the court of the Mughal Emperor Akbar, it was Rudolf Acquavia, S.J., who was actually seen in a photo at Akbar's court. But Rudolf Acquavia was related to the Jesuit general Claudio Acquavia. But he came at a later time in history. No, it's a good point. The Ricci, it'd be interesting to see if they are related. They probably are. I would, in some way. I just want to pull up here. If you see this article on my screen, this was the article that showed some of the Vatican property in London, England. Where was that here? Give me a second. I want to see. Okay, here's the property here. Okay. So last time I pulled this up on my computer started lagging. But here's some of the property that the Vatican now owns in London, England, thanks to Mussolini. All of this here, like this Bulgari store, and all of the property above it is theirs. And they own this Block 30 at St. James Square, appraised at $15 million in 2006. But they own properties like this, just all over the world. I just wanted to mention that. So when you actually start quantifying how much money they have, Aberman had said you can't quantify it. I bet the Catholic Church doesn't even know how much money they have. Like, if they were being honest about it. Like, there's so much you can't count it.
Yeah, I shudder to think of the wealth. I mean, you think about it, it's millennia, literally millennia. How often, how much they have been, how many years, decades, centuries they have been stealing the wealth of other nations. What is it that they got from England? Is it the Peter's pence, something like that? They continued to take a tax from England. I got.
That originated in England. Yeah, and that was after they got the English throne subservient to them in 1213. You've shown that photo before, I know, on your channel.
Prince John Lackland gave the crown to the papal legate, and they've literally owned England ever since.
Yeah, Mike, how many people do you think know that England is like a literal fiefdom of the papacy? And you're right, England, they still pay the tributary Peter's pence tax. I know many of the European countries do. There's a name.
Eric, pull up the coat of arms of London. London is a sovereign city. Pull up the coat of arms of London.
Yeah, I'll pull this up here.
We should round it off at 3 hours. I can't believe we've been going 3 hours. Let's round it up in about 12 minutes.
Oh, sounds good to me. You can do that. Let me get this coat of arms up here, though.
So 3 sovereign cities that come to my mind: Washington, D.C., London, and Rome. And of those 2, oh, by the way, I wanted to mention that the phallus of Osiris in the center of St. Peter's Square was stolen from the Heliopolis in Egypt, I think by Caligula. Oh, that's not Roman Catholic at all. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have had to do that. There's nothing Catholic about the coat of arms of the city of London.
Yeah, nothing to see here, folks. I'll show you one here. I'll show you here one that is pretty funny. I guess the agents, I guess they just don't show you this because Norway police logo, not police chiefs. Look at this. Is there anything to see here, guys? Look at that.
Oh yeah. Those equidistant crosses are versions of the Maltese cross, which is sun worship. Maltese cross has nothing to do with Christianity and everything to do with sun worship, just like the sunburst in the Jesuit monogram, just like the sunburst in the. Oh my goodness!
And didn't you find that the Smithsonian Museum uses the same logo as the Jesuit sunburst?
Yeah. You pull it up if you want.
I'll pull that up here. And I just want to highlight, so you can see two countries here, the national police. You saw Norway's national police and Sweden's national police openly flaunt military Roman fasces right on their, logos. It's right in plain sight.
And just so you guys remember in the audience, the fasces is an implement of war, a spear or an axe bound by rods. And its purpose is to signify everyone under the authority of a single man. And as far as Rome is concerned, that's the Pope.
Oh, and look at so after Putin came in, Putin recently has been praising the Pope, and he came in with a kind of a shady apartment bombing. But this was changed. This logo came into being in 2004. I think this was the year that Moscow police put up a bust of the Catholic Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the infamous Soviet Cheka police. But the new Russian, and you can see here, this is the Habsburg Knights Templar double eagle here. But
that's the Russian Federation. Right next to that is the flag of the FSB, which is just an inverted Maltese cross. You got the red on the outside rather than on the inside. So who really and the double eagle, the Templar double eagle in the middle of it. So the FSB is the most powerful organization in Russia, clearly controlled by the Vatican. Monstrance, Mark, God bless you. That's exactly what I was trying to think of. The monstrance that they hold up for their circular little sun worship wafer during the Mass is almost always a sunburst. And inside the monstrance is a semicircle, not a semicircle, crescent. Is a crescent, like a moon crescent that holds the so-called Eucharist inside the sunburst monstrance. And oh, by the way, the phallus of Osiris across from the womb of Isis, that architecture in St. Peter's is perfectly mirrored, in fact, to an obscene degree in Washington, demonically controlled. Washington, D.C. used to be called Little Rome on the Potomac. It's obviously the spitting image of the Vatican. But the phallus in Washington is many times bigger than the phallus in the middle of St. Peter's Square. And if you're looking down from the sky, what do you see? You see, it looks like a British flag. Well, that eight-spoked is also a sunburst. And the Smithsonian, right there. And very specifically, the alternating straight and wavy lines of the sunburst is meant to be sexual, male and female.
I think the Jesuit logo has the same straight alternate. Yeah, right here. These are straight and then
alternating straight and wavy. One is male, one is female.
I see. So that's basically the exact same logo. It's just without the IHS. That's what the Smithsonian did there. You can see here again, straight line, curvy line, straight line.
And so who is our trusted name for so-called science, whether it's space or archaeology or you name it, wherever it is that you need to be snowed and given lies, we trust the Smithsonian. How many people would connect the Smithsonian to the Jesuits?
Oh, no. And this is another great one here. The Illuminati game. And I find there's a lot of interesting cards in this deck. But you see who made this game here? You see Steven Jackson Games, abbreviated SJ Games. SJ.
Steven Jackson.
I think that's an abbreviation, though, for the Steven Jackson Games is officially abbreviated as SJ Games. And if you think SJ Games, Society of Jesus Games, and the Jesuits actually created the Illuminati back in the with Adam Weishaupt back in 1776. He was an ordained Jesuit.
Just as the Freemasons of the Southern jurisdiction are usually just called abbreviated SJ.
Yeah, absolutely. And the SJ, the Scottish Rite's 32nd degree, has the same motto as the Jesuits: Ad Mortium Al Gloriam. So like they're for good reason they call themselves SJ. Interestingly, we know we've covered how like the Jesuits were intimately involved in creating the United States, and it seems to me when presidents of the United States are Freemasons, they all seem to come from the Scottish Rite branch of Freemasonry.
Probably the most overtly controlled by the Jesuits. George, you trying to jump in? We need to close this out.
Okay, yes, I just wanted to mention one other thing. In terms of popular culture, over the weekend, I just saw the latest It movie, It 2, which is based on the Stephen King novel. And this is material to our conversation vicariously, because two of the main stars of the movie are James Hayter and Isaiah Mustafa. James Hayter went to Cassius Preparatory School in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is a Catholic school. And Hayter is fairly popular. He's done a number. He was a cast member of Saturday Night Live, and he was in Tropic Thunder, Superbad, Superbad, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Night at the Museum, Men in Black 3, Trainwreck. So he's in not quite everything, but probably every other thing. And of course, he plays one of the main characters in the film. One of the other characters is played by Isaiah Mustafa, his character's name is Mike. He went to Santa Clara High School in Los Angeles, which is a Jesuit school, or is actually a Catholic school. So two of the prominent actors in the film went to Catholic schools. Now, there's one. You're talking about the Freemasons. Now, the film, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the It franchise, which is based on a Stephen King novel. The antagonist is Pennywise. He normally appears as a clown. He was originally portrayed by Tim Curry, and most recently by Bill Skarsgård. Well, the film was actually the movie was actually made in Ontario, Canada, several different places in and around Toronto, Hamilton, and the bulk of the interior shots were shot at the Scottish Rite Temple. Most of the indoor shots were shot at the local Scottish Rite Temple in Hamilton, Ontario. So what?
Very interesting. Yeah, I think they're involved in Hollywood. I know Jimmy Kimmel's he's a Catholic too. I think he was an altar boy growing up. Jimmy Kimmel, devout Catholic. His studio is in an ex-Scottish Rite Masonic hall in Los Angeles. I'm pretty sure on the outside of it, when you're walking into a studio, still you can see like the Masonic, lodge number on the outside.
That reminds me
of subject to look into.
That reminds me of Predator 2018, which I covered in one of my final podcast shows, where they have this group of space rangers or future rangers, and one of them, we're supposed to believe that all these guys are tough warrior soldier types, and I said the only one that would come across for me, if he was doing his job right, and if you gave him the right script, would have been Tom Jane, who I like his work. I don't know anything about the guy, but one of the ones that they made a comedian, Keegan Michael Kay. They made him one of these future space rangers, and he's about as believable as a tough guy as Barack Obama is as believable as a Navy SEAL. Now, why did they do that? Square peg into a round hole. He is Jesuit trained. Anytime you see this, Michael Keaton. I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton is Batman. He's a short little comedian. Pardon me for my redundancy. He's a short comedian or a small guy, small framed comedian. The last person I would think of as Batman is Michael Keaton. Square peg into a round hole. When do you see that? when the Jesuits are forcing people where they don't belong. Roman Catholic, Jesuit trained, Catholic trained, Jew, or sexual deviant, or perhaps all of the above, and you've got it covered in any kind of entertainment field. If you've got a Catholic father and a Jewish mother or vice versa, you are set. You are absolutely set.
Well, absolutely. And this goes across the sports. I was just listening. I'll tune in. I watched the odd bread and circus game, like not much, but the odd time. The odd time I'll listen to some of the sportscasters, and all of them seem to be Catholic educated too. Like just off the top of my head, on Fox Radio, a big personality, Doug Gottlieb, went to Notre Dame. Chris Broussard, another big personality on Fox Sports Radio, went to a Catholic high school. You know, and that's a whole other rabbit hole within itself. You know, Joe Lunardi, the creator of bracketology for college basketball during the March Madness tournament, which what that is like millions of people waste, you know, hundreds of dollars betting on like that they're going to get a perfect bracket in the March Madness tournament, which never happens. But Joe Lunardi, who founded bracketology, is literally a faculty member at Jesuit St. Joseph's University. Bill Simmons, another huge guy in the sports radio community. Bill Simmons was on ESPN and then on HBO. He has his own network now, or his own website, I think, called The Ringer. He went to Jesuit Holy Cross, and he's known as like the sports guy, like your everyday sports, you know, announcer. He's like the relatable sports guy for your average Joe sports fan. He went to Jesuit Holy Cross. So it's across the you know, and then you go into ESPN. Tony Reali has a show Around the Horn. He went to Jesuit Fordham. Michael Wilbon is on the ESPN show Pardon the Interruption. He went to Jesuit St. Ignatius Academy in Chicago. The same Jesuit school where George Lucas's new wife went to. She's on the board at DreamWorks and Starbucks and a bunch of others.
Well, so, we need to close up, but we could do an entire show on bread and circuses. They even have one of the Lombardi children or grandchildren there as a commentator on ESPN. Vince Lombardi, hyper.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have one of the Lombardi
kids. He was a Knight of Malta too, eh? He was a Knight of Malta on top of being a Knight of Columbus, going to Jesuit Fordham, going to Catholic seminary, and he was honored by Jesuit Fordham like 6 times.
He is the name and the face of American football, and you don't get any more Catholic than Vince Lombardi. So, hey guys, great show. I can't believe you did 3 hours. I got to go. I got a ton of stuff to do. Continue to do the great work. I had to sit down with a notepad with your last vid, Eric. George, keep researching. Everybody in the audience, thanks so much for being there, and hopefully, God willing, we will see you again soon, maybe in a week.
Yeah, Johnny, I'll probably cut it here too. Do you want to wrap up with anything, George, before we sign off?
Well, yes, you did this, Johnny. You did this about a year and a half ago, for March Madness 2018, and you said, "Look at it. It's the top 64 teams, but how many of the teams that get to the college basketball finals are Catholic/Jesuit?" You have Villanova, you have Gonzaga, you have Xavier. It's usually 5 or 10 out of the top 64, and they usually will make it to the final rounds, to where they have so many prominent Catholic/Jesuit schools. They're almost guaranteed to make it to the final rounds or win it all. I mean,
yeah, George, I'd recommend if someone was into sports betting, I'd tell them to bet on the Jesuit Catholic college.
That's the Jesuit team.
I mean, case in point, I brought this up last year, but the last 5 years, the Golden State Warriors have been to the NBA Finals, and they've won it 3 times. Their general manager is Rob Myers, and he got his law degree from Loyola, LA. So he's basically, it's not necessarily rigged, but it's just like
there's so many of them out there, George. It doesn't matter as long as you give the right perks. You can narrow it down, and it's like an election. either way, they win. I gotta go, guys. Great show. You can keep going if you want. I just gotta keep going.
Well,
Let me know next time you want to get together, and I'll be there. Whether this weekend or next weekend, we'll be there.
Yeah, I'll keep
Okay.
in touch. And I got to get going here too. I just got to start getting ready for work. I got to go in about an hour or so.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Stay in touch.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll stay in
Okay.
touch. Great show, everyone. And I recommend people haven't. Check out if you haven't checked out the back catalog of the Cirucci team briefs we've done, or just my channel or Johnny's channel. I recommend
You bet.
people do that. There's a wealth of information on there for you to digest.
Yep.
Okay. Well, take care, Eric, and
Take care.
I'll
God bless.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Peace and love.